The moment Gwen Hollister's mouth twisted into that triumphant smirk and said those 7 words, I knew my entire world had just shifted. We don't need your foreign connections anymore. Standing there in her corner office on the 42nd floor, watching her cancel 18 months of my life's work with 3 swift keystrokes, I felt something break inside me that I hadn't felt since I was 17 years old. The same hollow ache that came the morning I found my father slumped over his kitchen table, surrounded by rejection letters and foreclosure notices, his heart having given out from the stress of losing everything to corporate predators exactly like her. She didn't even look up from her monitor as she terminated contract after contract. Akiko Tanaka from Osaka, the Petrova family in Bulgaria, Miguel Santos in Mexico City. People who had trusted me, who had built their businesses around our partnerships, who were probably right now preparing shipments they'd never be paid for. Honestly, I don't understand why Harrison hired you in the first place. Gwen continued, her fingers dancing across the keyboard like she was playing piano. All this relationship-building nonsense. We're a business, not a charity for immigrant sob stories. Before I dive deeper into what happened next, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know where my story is reaching across the world. And please like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification because what I'm about to share with you changed everything. Not just for me, but for everyone who thought powerful people could destroy lives without consequences. My name is Claire, and I need you to understand something about Gwen Hollister before we continue. She wasn't just any executive. She was the kind of person who had built her entire career on a foundation of other people's broken dreams. 23 years at Morrison Industrial, climbing from junior analyst to vice president of global procurement, leaving a trail of destroyed careers behind her like breadcrumbs. But here's what she didn't know about me, what nobody at Morrison knew about me. 15 years ago, when I was a freshman at State, my father worked for a small consulting firm that Gwen's previous company acquired. Dad was 58, had been with his firm for 16 years, spoke 3 languages fluently, and had built relationships across Europe that brought in 60% of their international revenue. Gwen systematically destroyed him over 6 months, not with one dramatic confrontation, but with the slow poison of professional humiliation. She questioned his reports in meetings, reassigned his clients to younger staff, started rumors about his mental capacity, made him rewrite proposals 5, 6, 7 times for reasons that changed daily. She turned his own team against him by suggesting he was holding back the company's growth. My father, who had survived immigrating to this country with nothing, who had built a reputation based on honor and reliability, who had never missed a day of work in his entire career, started having panic attacks in the office parking lot. He'd sit in his car for 20 minutes every morning, trying to gather the strength to walk inside and face another day of psychological warfare. The morning I found him at that kitchen table, surrounded by termination papers and medical bills he couldn't afford, was the morning I promised myself that, someday, somehow, I would understand people like Gwen Hollister. I would learn how they operated, how they thought, how they justified destroying human beings for profit margins and personal advancement. I studied business, specialized in international supply chain management, and spent 7 years working for smaller firms, learning every aspect of global procurement. Not because I loved the work, but because I was building myself into exactly the kind of person who could get close to someone like Gwen. When the position at Morrison opened up, when I saw Gwen's name listed as the hiring manager, I knew the universe was giving me an opportunity I couldn't waste. But I also knew that simple revenge wouldn't be enough. It had to be poetic. It had to teach her something about consequences. It had to make her feel the same helplessness my father felt in those final months. So I took the job, and I became exactly what Gwen needed me to be: enthusiastic, hardworking, grateful for the opportunity. Someone who asked just enough questions to seem engaged, but never enough to seem threatening. Someone who could travel extensively without complaints, who could work with difficult international partners, who could solve problems that more senior staff couldn't handle. For 18 months, I built relationships that Morrison had never dreamed possible, not just with suppliers, but with their families, their communities, their stories. I learned that Akiko Tanaka's grandfather had been forced to sell his textile business after the war, and she was trying to rebuild what her family had lost. I discovered that the Petrova family had started their packaging company after fleeing political persecution, using their grandmother's life savings as collateral. Miguel Santos had 3 daughters, all studying engineering, all hoping to expand the family's precision tooling business into aerospace components. Every single relationship I cultivated was with people who reminded me of my father, people who had worked their entire lives to build something meaningful, something that could survive beyond themselves. But I wasn't building these relationships for Morrison's benefit. I was building them for something much larger. You see, while I was traveling and negotiating and solving supply chain problems, I was also researching Gwen's career history. Every company she'd worked for, every acquisition she'd managed, every restructuring she'd overseen, and what I found was a pattern that made my stomach hurt with recognition. 15 years ago, it wasn't just my father. There was Linda Chen, a translator who had helped Gwen's team navigate contracts in Taiwan. Gwen fired her 3 days before Christmas, claiming budget cuts, then hired her replacement at twice the salary. Linda's family lost their house. There was Roberto Vega, who had managed relationships with Mexican manufacturers for 8 years. Gwen eliminated his position, took credit for his work, then used his contacts to negotiate deals that saved the company millions. Roberto ended up driving for a delivery service, trying to support his wife's cancer treatments without health insurance. There was Elena Kowalski, whose small Polish firm had provided specialty components for automotive clients. Gwen convinced the parent company to demand impossible contract terms, forcing Elena into bankruptcy, then swooped in to acquire her equipment and client list for pennies. The pattern was always the same. Identify vulnerable people doing essential work, systematically undermine them, take everything they'd built, move on without looking back. Gwen had built her entire career on the corpses of small business owners and immigrant workers who trusted the wrong person. So when I started reaching out to suppliers for Morrison, I wasn't just looking for the best deals or the most reliable partners. I was specifically seeking out people whose stories echoed the ones I'd found in Gwen's wake. People who had been broken by corporate predators, who had rebuilt from nothing, who understood what it meant to have your life's work destroyed by someone who saw you as disposable. And I found them everywhere. Akiko's textile company. Her father had been cheated by an American distributor in the 90s, losing contracts that nearly bankrupted the family. The Petrova packaging firm. They'd been forced out of partnerships with Western companies who promised stability then disappeared with their designs. Miguel's tooling business. His brother had been systematically excluded from contracts by procurement managers who preferred working with larger, whiter-owned firms. Every supplier I brought to Morrison carried scars from people exactly like Gwen. And slowly, carefully, I started telling them stories. Not about my father specifically, but about the patterns I'd observed, the way certain executives operated, the warning signs to watch for, the importance of protecting yourself when dealing with corporate predators. I never said Gwen's name. I never made specific accusations. I just shared observations about how powerful people sometimes treated partners they considered expendable, and how important it was to maintain leverage in relationships with companies that might not honor their commitments. By month 12, every supplier contract I'd negotiated included specific clauses about notification periods, penalty structures, and coordinated withdrawal rights. Terms that seemed reasonable from Morrison's perspective but would prove devastating if triggered simultaneously. I presented these clauses as standard international protections, necessary for working with overseas partners who had been burned before. Gwen signed every contract without reading the fine print, trusting my expertise and focused only on the cost savings I was delivering. Morrison's profit margins improved by 38% in my first year, largely because I'd found suppliers willing to work for rates that barely covered their costs, hoping to build long-term relationships with an American company that seemed to value their contributions. By month 15, I had documentation of everything, not just the contracts and financial arrangements, but the personal stories behind each partnership. Video testimonials from supplier families about their hopes for the future, photos of their facilities, their workers, their communities. evidence of how Morrison's business was literally supporting hundreds of families across 3 continents. I also had detailed reports on Gwen's decision-making patterns, her attitudes toward international partners, her casual dismissal of suppliers she considered beneath her notice, comments she'd made about these people and their backwards business practices, email chains where she mocked the English skills of partners who spoke 4 languages fluently. By month 18, the web was complete. Every critical component in Morrison's supply chain flowed through relationships I'd built with people who had been destroyed by executives like Gwen. People who trusted me, who understood that I saw them as human beings rather than profit centers, who knew I would never treat them the way corporate America had treated them before. And then came that Tuesday morning when Gwen decided she'd had enough of my relationship-building nonsense. I'd been in her office for what I thought was a routine quarterly review. Morrison had just announced record profits, driven largely by the international partnerships I'd developed. I expected recognition, maybe discussion of a promotion. Instead, Gwen pulled up her computer and started explaining how the company was shifting toward domestic suppliers exclusively. "These foreign contracts are too complicated," she said, scrolling through the list of partnerships I'd spent months cultivating. "Too much hand-holding, too many cultural sensitivities to manage. We need suppliers who understand American business practices." I watched her cancel Akiko's textile contract, worth $2 million annually. Gone. The Petrova packaging deal, 18 months of negotiations, terminated. Miguel's precision components, essential for Morrison's aerospace division, eliminated. "But Gwen," I said carefully, "these suppliers provide components we can't source domestically. The Petrova family produces packaging materials with specifications that American manufacturers can't match. Miguel's tooling precision is beyond anything available in our price range here." She looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language myself. "Claire, you're thinking like a relationship counselor instead of a business professional. We don't need their sob stories about family businesses and cultural traditions. We need products delivered on schedule at competitive prices. There are plenty of American suppliers who can provide what we need without all the emotional complexity." That phrase, emotional complexity, hit me like a physical blow. It was exactly the kind of language Gwen had used 15 years ago when describing my father's inefficient approach to client relationships. The same dismissive tone she'd employed while systematically destroying everyone who had ever trusted her professional judgment. I realized in that moment that Gwen hadn't learned anything from her decades of destroying lives. She hadn't developed empathy or wisdom or even basic human decency. She was exactly the same person who had driven my father to his grave, just with better suits and a bigger office. "What about the penalty clauses?" I asked quietly. "The coordinated withdrawal provisions in these contracts." Gwen waved her hand dismissively. "Legal will handle whatever paperwork needs to be filed. These people should be grateful they got 18 months of business from us. Most international suppliers never get opportunities like this." She finished canceling the last contract and turned to face me with that triumphant smirk. "Honestly, Claire, I think this will be good for your professional development. You've gotten too emotionally invested in these partnerships. In this business, you can't afford to care about every supplier's personal story. Success requires focusing on results, not relationships." And that's when she said it. The 7 words that changed everything. "We don't need your foreign connections anymore." I nodded slowly, thanked her for the feedback, and walked out of her office. But instead of going back to my desk, I walked directly to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and started making phone calls. The first call was to Akiko Tanaka in Osaka. It was 3 a.m. her time, but she answered on the second ring, probably thinking it was an emergency, which, in a way, it was. "Akiko, this is Claire from Morrison. I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, and then I need you to make some phone calls of your own." Within 6 hours, every single supplier I'd partnered with over 18 months had received identical messages, not from me directly, but from each other. The network I'd spent so long building wasn't just about business relationships. It was about shared experiences, mutual protection, and understanding exactly when to act together. Akiko called the Petrova family in Bulgaria. The Petrovas reached out to Miguel in Mexico City. Miguel contacted the semiconductor manufacturers in Taiwan. The Taiwanese suppliers called the packaging companies in Vietnam. Like dominoes falling in reverse, each conversation triggered 3 more, until suppliers across 12 countries were simultaneously reviewing their Morrison contracts and discovering something interesting. Every single one of their agreements contained the same coordinated withdrawal clause I'd carefully negotiated months earlier. Language that seemed like standard legal protection but actually meant that if Morrison terminated any international supplier without cause, all remaining international suppliers had the right to withdraw immediately without penalty. By Thursday morning, Morrison's production floor was silent. Not because of a strike or equipment failure, but because 68% of their critical components simply stopped arriving. The precision tooling from Miguel's shop that kept their aerospace division running, the specialty polymers from Vietnam that made their automotive parts possible, the textile components from Akiko that were essential for their defense contracts. I watched from my desk as operations managers started panicking around 10 a.m., making frantic phone calls to suppliers who politely explained they were exercising their contractual withdrawal rights. By noon, the manufacturing supervisors were gathered in emergency meetings, trying to understand how Morrison had become so dependent on international suppliers they apparently no longer needed. Gwen spent Thursday afternoon in crisis management mode, calling domestic suppliers who quoted prices 3 times higher than our international partners, with delivery timelines stretching into next quarter. Companies that could maybe provide substitutes for some components, but had never even heard of others. This is a temporary adjustment period, she announced to the operations team Friday morning, her voice carrying just a hint of strain. We're transitioning to more reliable domestic partnerships that align with our strategic vision. But by Friday afternoon, Morrison's biggest client, a defense contractor expecting delivery of specialized components next week, called to express concerns about production delays. Then the automotive company that relied on Morrison's precision parts started asking questions about alternative suppliers. I spent that entire week documenting everything, not just the operational chaos, but Gwen's responses to it. Her dismissive comments about suppliers who were overreacting to normal business decisions. Her insistence that international partners were inherently unreliable and that Morrison was better off without them. Her complete inability to understand why terminating 68% of their supply chain simultaneously might cause problems. But the real revelation came Monday morning, when CEO Harrison called an emergency executive meeting. I wasn't supposed to be in that room, but Harrison had specifically requested that I attend, since I was the only person who fully understood Morrison's international supplier relationships. Gwen looked genuinely confused about why I was there, probably assuming I'd be blamed for the crisis rather than consulted about solutions. Harrison started the meeting with a simple question. Can someone explain to me how we went from record profits to production shutdown in 4 days? Gwen launched into a polished presentation about supply chain diversification, strategic realignment, and the benefits of domestic sourcing. She had slides prepared showing cost projections and risk assessments, all demonstrating why eliminating international suppliers was sound business strategy. The temporary disruption we're experiencing, she concluded confidently, is the natural consequence of transitioning away from an over-reliance on foreign partnerships that were ultimately unsustainable. Harrison listened patiently, then turned to me. Claire, you built these relationships. Help me understand what actually happened here. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, without fully realizing it, for 18 months. I opened my laptop and pulled up the presentation I'd been building since Tuesday, the one that told the real story of Morrison's international partnerships. Mr. Harrison, with your permission, I'd like to show you exactly who our international suppliers are and what our relationships with them actually meant. The first slide showed Akiko Tanaka's textile facility in Osaka. Not just production statistics, but photos of her family's workshop, her grandfather's original equipment, the 3 generations of workers who had helped build components for Morrison's defense contracts. I explained how Akiko had restructured her entire operation around Morrison's specifications, hiring 12 additional workers and investing in new machinery specifically for our partnership. The second slide introduced the Petrova family. Elena Petrova's husband had lost his engineering job during Bulgaria's economic crisis, and their packaging company had been their family's path back to stability. Morrison's contracts had allowed them to expand into a new facility, providing employment for 43 people in their rural community. The third slide showed Miguel Santos and his precision tooling operation. I displayed photos of his 3 daughters, all studying engineering, all hoping to join the family business that Morrison's aerospace contracts had made possible. Miguel had been working 16-hour days to meet Morrison's quality standards, building equipment that literally couldn't be sourced anywhere else at our price point. Slide after slide, I introduced Harrison to people Gwen had dismissed as foreign connections. I showed him facility tours, quality certifications, testimonials from workers whose families depended on Morrison's business. I demonstrated how these weren't just vendor relationships, but partnerships with specific human beings who had bet their futures on Morrison's commitment. These suppliers weren't just providing components, I explained, watching Harrison's expression change as he absorbed the scope of what we'd lost. They were providing components that can't be replicated domestically. Akiko's textile process uses techniques her grandfather developed. The Petrova's packaging materials have chemical properties that American manufacturers can't match. Miguel's tooling precision exists because he's been refining his processes for 20 years. Then I showed Harrison the financial impact. Not just the immediate production delays, but the long-term consequences of losing supplier relationships that had taken decades to develop. The contracts we'd voided represented partnerships worth $47 million annually, with suppliers who had been averaging 18% year-over-year growth in their work with Morrison. Mr. Harrison, I continued, these partnerships weren't expendable overhead. They were competitive advantages that our domestic competitors don't have access to. We were paying lower prices for higher quality because these suppliers trusted Morrison enough to prioritize our contracts over potentially more profitable opportunities. I watched Gwen's face throughout my presentation, seeing her confusion gradually shift to concern as Harrison asked increasingly pointed questions about the termination decisions. Why hadn't she consulted with operations before canceling critical supplier relationships? Why hadn't she explored transition timelines instead of immediate terminations? Why hadn't she understood the coordinated withdrawal clauses before triggering them? But the moment that really changed everything came when I showed Harrison the final section of my presentation. The documentation I'd gathered about each supplier's previous experiences with American companies. The pattern of international partners being promised long-term relationships, delivering exceptional results, then being abandoned when companies decided to streamline their operations. These suppliers worked with Morrison despite having been burned before. I explained, because they believed we were different, because I spent 18 months proving that we valued their contributions and understood their worth. Harrison was quiet for several minutes, studying the financial projections and supplier profiles. Finally, he looked at Gwen with an expression I'd never seen before, not anger, but deep disappointment. Gwen, help me understand the strategic thinking behind eliminating $47 million in annual revenue without consulting operations, finance, or the executive team. Gwen started explaining again about domestic sourcing and simplified logistics, but her confidence was wavering. She kept using phrases like, these people, and cultural complications, language that sounded increasingly problematic in the context of my presentation. What cultural complications? Harrison asked. Claire's documentation suggests these suppliers were consistently exceeding quality standards and delivery requirements. Well, the language barriers, the time zone difficulties, the constant need for relationship management, Gwen replied, her voice getting tighter. International suppliers require so much hand-holding compared to domestic partners who understand American business practices. That's when Harrison asked the question that revealed everything. Gwen, have you reviewed the withdrawal clauses in these contracts? Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. Because, according to Claire's documentation, every international supplier had the contractual right to withdraw immediately if Morrison terminated other international suppliers without cause. Did you understand that canceling one contract would trigger coordinated withdrawal from all international partners? More silence. Gwen's face was losing color as she realized Harrison wasn't asking rhetorical questions. "Mr. Harrison," she said carefully, "I trusted that legal had reviewed these contracts appropriately. The withdrawal clauses seemed like standard protective language." "Standard protective language," Harrison repeated slowly. "Gwen, these clauses exist specifically to prevent companies from treating international suppliers as expendable. They're designed to ensure that partnerships are honored rather than eliminated on executive whims." I watched Gwen realize that she'd walked into a trap of her own making. Not because I'd tricked her, but because her fundamental contempt for international partners had blinded her to the actual terms of relationships I'd spent months negotiating. "Claire," Harrison said, turning back to me, "in your assessment, is there any possibility of rebuilding these partnerships?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when I could deliver the truth that would change everything for Gwen, without revealing my personal motivations. "Mr. Harrison, I spent Friday reaching out to our former suppliers to explore reconciliation possibilities. Unfortunately, the response has been consistent across all partners. They're willing to consider future relationships with Morrison, but only under one specific condition." "What condition?" "They require written guarantee that Gwen Hollister will have no involvement in international supplier relationships going forward." The room went dead silent. Gwen stared at me like I'd slapped her. "They what?" she whispered. "I'm sorry, Gwen, but I have to be completely honest about their feedback. Multiple suppliers specifically mentioned feeling disrespected during previous interactions with you. They cited comments about their English skills, dismissive attitudes toward their business practices, and what they perceived as cultural insensitivity." I pulled up my laptop again, showing Harrison documented communications from our former partners. Not recordings or private conversations, but formal written responses to my reconciliation inquiries. Akiko Tanaka's letter was particularly damaging. Ms. Hollister's approach to international partnerships demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of mutual respect in business relationships. Her comments about foreign complications and simplified logistics suggest Morrison views international suppliers as problematic rather than valuable. Miguel Santos had been even more direct. "We appreciate Claire's professionalism, but cannot risk future investments with company leadership that considers our contributions dispensable." Ms. Hollister's termination approach indicates systematic disregard for international partner commitments. One by one, I shared feedback from suppliers across 3 continents, all expressing similar concerns about Gwen's attitudes and decision-making. Not angry rants or emotional complaints, but professional assessments of why they couldn't trust Morrison's leadership going forward. "These aren't personal attacks," I explained to Harrison. "They're business decisions based on demonstrated patterns of behavior. International suppliers can't afford to invest in partnerships with companies that might eliminate them arbitrarily." Harrison spent the next hour reviewing supplier, documentation, contract terms, and financial projections. He asked detailed questions about rebuilding possibilities, domestic sourcing alternatives, and operational timelines. Throughout the entire discussion, Gwen sat in increasingly uncomfortable silence as the scope of her miscalculation became clear. Finally, Harrison closed his laptop and looked directly at Gwen. "I need some time to review this situation with the board. Claire, can you provide me with comprehensive documentation of our international supplier relationships and the specific feedback you've received about rebuilding possibilities?" "Of course, Mr. Harrison." "Gwen, I'll need you to prepare a detailed report explaining the strategic reasoning behind these termination decisions and your assessment of domestic sourcing alternatives." After the meeting ended, Gwen cornered me by the elevator, her professional composure finally cracking. "Claire, what exactly did you tell these suppliers about me?" I looked at her with the same calm expression I'd maintained throughout the presentation. "I told them the truth, Gwen. I shared your exact words about not needing foreign connections anymore." "That's not. I didn't mean," she started, then stopped herself. "You didn't mean what? That you don't value international partnerships? That cultural sensitivity is unnecessary? That relationship management is emotional complexity we can't afford?" She stared at me, probably realizing for the first time that her casual dismissal of international suppliers had been documented and shared with the very people she'd dismissed. Those suppliers trusted Morrison because they trusted me, I continued. When you terminated their contracts while calling their work foreign complications, you destroyed relationships that took 18 months to build. They're not angry, Gwen. They're protecting themselves from exactly the kind of treatment you've given them. The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. Just before the doors closed, I said the words I'd been waiting 15 years to deliver. Sometimes the people you consider dispensable turn out to be the ones holding everything together. 3 weeks later, Harrison announced that Morrison was restructuring its procurement division. Gwen Hollister would be transitioning to a customer service role, where her domestic focus would be better utilized. I was promoted to Director of Global Supplier Relations, with full authority to rebuild the international partnerships Morrison had lost. It took 6 months to restore relationships with most of our former suppliers, not because they were vindictive, but because they needed proof that Morrison had learned from its mistakes. They wanted guarantees, oversight structures, and cultural sensitivity training for all executive staff involved in international partnerships. Gwen lasted 8 months in customer service before transferring to a smaller company. According to people who stayed in touch, she now handles complaint calls for a regional distribution center, dealing daily with frustrated customers who feel ignored and dismissed by corporate policies they can't control. I never told anyone about my father, never mentioned the real reason I'd chosen Morrison, or why I'd spent 18 months building relationships with suppliers who reminded me of people Gwen had destroyed before. The revenge wasn't about exposing her past, it was about letting her experience the consequences of her own choices. Every supplier who withdrew from Morrison did so because Gwen had treated them as expendable. Every partnership we lost was lost because she valued control more than collaboration. Every financial consequence Morrison faced was the direct result of her decisions, her words, her fundamental inability to see international partners as human beings worthy of respect. The most satisfying part wasn't watching Gwen lose her executive position or seeing her struggle in customer service. It was knowing that she finally understood what my father had felt during those last 6 months of his life. The helplessness of watching everything you've built disappear because someone more powerful decided you were no longer valuable. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, if you understand why I spent 18 months planning something this complex, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Because there are more Gwen Hollisters out there, more executives who think human beings are expendable, and more stories about what happens when people underestimate the power of patience, planning, and the relationships we build with each other. The people who seem invisible to those in power, we see everything, and sometimes we remember longer than they think we do. I stood in Bryce's office, trying to process his words. Pack your things. Your position has been eliminated. The termination hit me like a physical shock, though I'd been expecting it for days. 1 week after Verity's funeral, and here I was, being fired. The timing wasn't coincidental. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, despite the storm raging inside. I understand. We'll need all client information transferred immediately, he continued, sliding a folder across his desk, especially any contacts you've been handling directly. I nodded, accepting the folder without opening it. Of course. And, he added, leaning forward with poorly concealed urgency, we'll need details about the West Coast accounts. Verity mentioned them before her. Unfortunate passing. That's when I knew. They had no idea she'd officially transferred the entire 1.2 million portfolio to me 3 days before her heart attack. No idea I'd already quietly resigned via certified mail that morning. I'll gather everything, I promised with a pleasant smile. Bryce seemed almost disappointed by my calm reaction. He'd expected tears, perhaps begging. Instead, he got professionalism that clearly unsettled him. You have until the end of the day, he said, dismissing me with a wave. I walked out of his office, past curious stares of colleagues who'd clearly been speculating about my closed-door meeting. Some looked away quickly, guilty about already knowing my fate. Others watched with barely concealed satisfaction. One less competitor on the corporate ladder. At my desk, I began methodically packing my few personal items into a small cardboard box the HR department had already provided. How considerate of them to have it ready. Nell from accounting approached, her voice lowered. Is it true? They're letting you go? Apparently, my position has been eliminated, I replied, carefully wrapping the small crystal paperweight Verity had given me for my 3-year anniversary with the company. That's ridiculous. You brought in that huge Coastal Solutions account just last month. I shrugged. Business decisions rarely make sense from the outside. What I didn't say. This was exactly what Verity had predicted. Exactly what we had planned for. 6 months earlier, Verity had called me into her office late one evening. Everyone else had gone home, leaving the floor quiet except for the distant hum of the cleaning crew's vacuum. Kenna, she said as I entered, close the door. I did as instructed, settling into the chair across from her desk. Verity pushed aside her computer monitor and slid a glass of water toward me. I've been watching you outperform everyone for 3 years, she said, her direct gaze as intense as ever. Yet they keep passing you over for promotion. I sipped the water silently. 5 years at the company, and despite bringing in more new business than anyone, I remained stuck while less qualified men climbed upward. The executive team has a particular vision, she continued, choosing her words carefully. And apparently, we don't fit it. What she didn't say, but we both understood. The all-male leadership team maintained their positions through an intricate network of favoritism. My boss had hit the glass ceiling so hard, she'd stopped trying to break through. I'm dying, she stated flatly. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I nearly choked on my water, setting the glass down with a shaking hand. When I'm gone, they'll carve up my client relationships like vultures. Unless, she outlined her plan, she would gradually introduce me to her most valuable clients, the West Coast portfolio worth $1.2 million in annual contracts. But officially, these meetings would appear as routine support work. They're watching the big accounts, she explained, not the scattered smaller ones that collectively matter most. For months, we worked together in plain sight. I met with creative entrepreneurs, boutique manufacturers, and innovative startups all along the coast. Verity introduced me as her right hand. The clients trusted her judgment. Meanwhile, at the office, the whispers began. Spending an awful lot of time with Verity, one colleague remarked loudly as I passed the break room. Probably fishing for that promotion, another responded with a snort. My immediate supervisor, Bryce, began requesting unusual reports, asking pointed questions about client meetings. I provided just enough information to satisfy without revealing our true activities. 2 weeks before she died, Verity finalized the paperwork. Legal transfer of client relationships, properly notarized. She even paid the transfer fees from her personal account. They'll come for you after I'm gone, she warned. Be ready. The day she died, I cried genuine tears. She'd become more than a mentor, but beneath my grief, her plan was already in motion. At her funeral, the executive team performed their sorrow beautifully. Bryce placed his hand on my shoulder, his touch uncomfortable and unwelcome. Such a loss, he said. We'll need to discuss transitioning her accounts soon. I nodded, eyes downcast. Whatever the company needs. That evening, I received a text from the CEO. Meeting tomorrow. Bring complete client list. I stayed up all night preparing 2 sets of documents. One included every client except those in the West Coast portfolio. The other was my resignation letter, effective immediately. With 2 weeks' notice, I wouldn't be required to work. The CEO glanced at my incomplete list during our morning meeting. Where are the West Coast accounts? I'm not familiar with those, I said, expression neutral. She handled them personally. His face tightened. Search her files. We need those clients. For a week, I pretended to search while secretly meeting with my inherited clients. Every evening, Bryce would demand updates. Every morning, I'd report finding nothing. The company grew desperate. The quarterly projections looked bleak without those accounts. The executive team huddled in closed-door meetings. Then came my termination. Bryce barely contained his satisfaction, assuming I'd be devastated. Now, as I placed the last of my belongings in the box, Nell touched my arm. What will you do now? I smiled. I have some ideas. If you're enjoying this story so far and want to know what happens next, Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I promise Kenna's journey is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment with what you think she should do after being fired like this. My name is Kenna Ellis, and until today, I was a senior account manager at one of the most prestigious firms in the city. Not the most glamorous title, but I made it work. I'm 32, single by choice, and determined in ways that often made my colleagues uncomfortable. Growing up in a small coastal town taught me patience. Watching my mother run a small shop while raising 2 kids alone taught me resourcefulness. 4 years at State College on scholarships taught me perseverance. And 5 years at this company taught me that playing by the rules was a luxury reserved for those who made them. Verity recognized that in me from the beginning. While other executives saw a quiet worker who followed directions, she saw the calculations behind my eyes. The first time she called me into her office, I thought I was being reprimanded. Instead, she asked what I thought about a proposal the team had celebrated that morning. "It's fundamentally flawed," I said, surprised by my own honesty. Instead of being offended, she smiled. "Explain." I outlined 3 critical weaknesses in the proposal that everyone else had missed. When I finished, she nodded once. "Tomorrow you'll join me in the client meeting. Say exactly what you just told me. But no buts. The client deserves honest expertise. That's what we're paid for." The next day, the client thanked us for our candor and signed a larger contract than originally proposed, specifically requesting that I be involved in implementation. That was the beginning of our working relationship. Verity became my mentor, though neither of us ever used that term. She pushed me, challenged me, and trusted me with increasingly important responsibilities. When I generated a 30% increase in my portfolio's revenue while others struggled to maintain their numbers, I expected recognition. Instead, Bryce was promoted to team lead, despite his mediocre performance. "You have to play their game," a female colleague advised. "Laugh at their jokes, join their happy hours, make them comfortable." I tried, briefly. Spent evenings nursing drinks I didn't want, listening to stories that weren't funny, pretending to be interested in golf tournaments I couldn't care less about. It made no difference. When the next promotion went to Quinn, who'd been with the company half as long as me, Verity called me into her office again. "Stop trying to be one of them," she said. "They've already decided who you are." "Which is a threat," I laughed. "I'm not threatening anyone. You outperform them consistently without playing their games. That's the most threatening thing you could do." She was right, of course. My results spoke for themselves, but numbers couldn't overcome the invisible barriers. I watched as male colleagues took credit for my ideas in meetings, interrupting me only to restate exactly what I'd just said to nods of approval. I endured clients addressing questions to junior male colleagues instead of me, despite my seniority. And through it all, I kept breaking records, bringing in business, making the company money they happily accepted while denying me advancement. Verity understood. As the only female executive, she'd fought the same battles for decades. She'd reached a level of success that demanded respect, but never acceptance. I watched her navigate board meetings where her suggestions were ignored until a male colleague repeated them. I saw her excluded from golf outings where real decisions were made. "Don't make my mistakes," she told me once. I waited for them to recognize my value. Don't wait. But I wasn't sure what the alternative was until the day she told me about her diagnosis: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months at best. She'd kept it secret from everyone except her doctor and now me. "Why tell me?" I asked, still processing the shock. "Because I need your help," she replied, "and because you deserve better than what they'll give you when I'm gone." Her plan was both simple and daring. The West Coast portfolio consisted of 23 clients she'd personally cultivated over 15 years. Small to mid-sized businesses that collectively generated $1.2 million in annual revenue. Not the flashiest accounts that executives bragged about at quarterly meetings, but steady, loyal clients who valued personal attention. "These relationships are built on trust," she explained. "When I'm gone, the company will distribute them among the team leads who have no relationship with these clients. Half will leave within a year. What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to inherit them." The next day began our careful choreography. Verity started introducing me to these clients as her trusted associate. We traveled to meetings together, her teaching me each client's history, preferences, and pain points. To the company, it looked like she was finally delegating some of her workload due to health issues she'd vaguely mentioned. In reality, she was transferring her most valuable asset to me, client trust. Zara, from the boutique tech startup, immediately liked me. Verity never brings anyone to our meetings. You must be special. Kenna sees things others miss, Verity said simply. Mateo, whose sustainable packaging company was growing rapidly, was more direct. Are you taking over for Verity? Just supporting for now, I replied, following our agreed script. Good. I hate repeating myself to new people. By the third month, I knew every client's business almost as well as Verity did. By the fourth month, some were calling me directly instead of her. By the fifth month, we were ready for the legal part. Everything must be documented properly, Verity insisted. They'll fight you otherwise. We met with her personal attorney, not the company's legal team. Papers were drawn up, signatures notarized, client permissions obtained. One by one, the accounts were officially transferred to me as the primary contact. The company remained oblivious, focused on larger accounts and quarterly projections. When Verity began coming to the office less frequently, citing medical appointments, no one questioned my increased client meetings. They assumed I was covering temporarily. Only Bryce seemed suspicious, demanding increasingly detailed reports. The executive team needs visibility into these accounts, he insisted. I provided surface-level information, nothing that revealed the depth of my new relationships with these clients. Verity had warned me about him specifically. Bryce has been trying to get his hands on my portfolio for years, she'd said. He knows those clients represent security, stability. 2 weeks before her death, Verity invited me to her home. I'd never been there before and was surprised by its modest size and practical furnishings. No extravagance despite her executive salary. I live within my means, she explained, noticing my expression. Financial independence gives you options. Remember that. On her dining table lay the final documents, official transfer of client relationships to me personally, not to the company, all properly executed. Is this even legal? I asked, stunned by the comprehensiveness of the paperwork. Completely. I'm transferring relationships I built, not company property. The distinction matters. She slid the papers toward me. Keep these somewhere safe, away from your home and office. I arranged for a safety deposit box that afternoon. They'll come for you after I'm gone, she warned, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. Be ready. 3 days later, her assistant called me in tears. Verity had suffered a heart attack in her sleep. She was gone. The company's response was swift. A tasteful email announcement. A donation to cancer research in her name. A team meeting where the CEO spoke about her contributions before quickly pivoting to moving forward and maintaining client relationships during this transition. At her funeral, I stood apart from my colleagues, watching their performance of grief. The CEO gave a polished eulogy that somehow managed to make Verity's achievements sound like they belonged to the company. Bryce approached me afterward, his expression sympathetic while his eyes remained cold. Such a loss, he said. We'll need to discuss transitioning her accounts soon. I nodded, eyes downcast. Whatever the company needs. That evening came the CEO's text, demanding the complete client list. The next morning, I provided the incomplete version, omitting all 23 West Coast clients. Where are the West Coast accounts? He demanded, frowning at the list. I'm not familiar with those, I lied smoothly. She handled them personally. His face tightened. Search her files. We need those clients. For the next week, I performed a thorough search of Verity's office, finding nothing because there was nothing to find. She'd been methodical in removing any trace of these particular client relationships. Meanwhile, I used my lunch breaks and evenings to meet with my new clients, reassuring them during this transition. Every single one expressed sadness at Verity's passing. Most added how relieved they were to still have me. Continuity is everything in business, Mateo said during our coffee meeting. If they'd assigned someone new, I would have walked. Each day, Bryce grew more agitated. The quarterly forecast looked increasingly concerning without those accounts. The executive team held closed-door meetings that ended with grim expressions and hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. Then came my termination meeting, the culmination of their frustration and my preparation. As I carried my box of belongings toward the elevator, Bryce approached one last time. "Before you go," he said, voice low and urgent, "where are those West Coast files? This isn't personal, it's business. The company needs those accounts." I set down my box and looked him directly in the eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play games, Kenna. Those clients represent over $1 million in annual revenue. They belong to this company." I picked up my box again. "Actually, they belong to whoever they choose to work with." His face reddened. "Is that a threat?" "Just a fact," I replied, stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed on his angry face, I allowed myself a small smile. The termination I'd been expecting had finally arrived. But unlike what Bryce and the executive team believed, this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The morning after my termination, I awoke before my alarm. The strange silence of not having to rush to the office settled around me like an unfamiliar blanket. For the first time in 5 years, I was unemployed. Technically. In reality, I was freer than I'd been in years. I made coffee and carried it to my small balcony, watching the city wake up. My phone buzzed with concerned messages from the few colleagues I'd been friendly with. Nell had sent 3 texts already, each more worried than the last. I answered her briefly. "I'm fine. Better than fine." The truth was, I'd been preparing for this day for months. The night before Verity's funeral, I'd opened a business checking account. 2 days later, I'd filed the paperwork for my new limited liability company. 3 weeks after that, I'd secured a small office space in a converted warehouse by the waterfront, walking distance from 5 of my new clients. All of this had been done quietly, methodically, following Verity's detailed instructions. "Don't rush," she'd advised. "Let them show their true colors first." And they had spectacularly. My phone rang, an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Kenna Ellis speaking. "Ms. Ellis, this is Gavin Stewart, Chief Legal Counsel for—" "I know who you are, Gavin," I interrupted. We'd met at several company functions, though he'd never remembered my name. "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "There seems to be some confusion regarding certain client relationships formerly managed by Verity Winters. The company would like to schedule a meeting to clarify these matters." "There's no confusion on my part," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Perhaps I'm not being clear. These client relationships belong to the company. Any attempt to redirect them would constitute theft of proprietary business assets. I'd been expecting this. Verity had prepared me for it. I have no intention of discussing this further without my attorney present," I said calmly. "Any additional communication should be directed to her office." I provided the contact information for Lorelei Chan, the lawyer Verity had introduced me to. "This could be resolved amicably," Gavin said, his tone shifting to something almost friendly. "The company is prepared to offer you a consulting arrangement to facilitate the transition of these accounts. Goodbye, Gavin." I ended the call and blocked the number. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. The CEO himself this time. I let it go to voicemail. His message was terse. "Kenna, this is a serious matter. Call me immediately." Instead, I sent a text to Mateo. "Still on for our 10 a.m. meeting?" His reply came seconds later. "Absolutely. Bringing the new product samples." I showered and dressed with care, choosing a sleek charcoal pantsuit that Verity had once admired. "Power isn't about blending in," she'd told me. "It's about standing your ground." The temporary office I'd leased wasn't fully furnished yet. Just a desk, 2 chairs, and a small conference table. But the view of the harbor made up for the Spartan interior. Mateo arrived precisely at 10, carrying a box of prototype packaging. "Nice place," he said, glancing around. "Bit empty, though." "For now," I replied. "I'm starting small." Mateo set his samples on the conference table. "Got a call from your old company this morning. Some guy named Bryce?" My pulse quickened. "What did he want?" "To schedule an urgent meeting about our account. Said there'd been a restructuring and he'd be taking over." Mateo shrugged. "I told him we're happy with our current arrangement. And what did he say to that?" He said there must be some misunderstanding, that all client contracts are with the company, not individual representatives. Mateo laughed. I told him to check his paperwork again. I smiled, feeling a wave of validation. And did he? Must have. He got very quiet, then said he'd have to get back to me. Mateo opened his sample box. Enough about that. Let me show you what we've been working on. By noon, I'd confirmed meetings with 5 more clients for the following day. By 3, I'd received emails from 7 others, all reporting similar calls from either Bryce or another executive at my former company. At 4, Lorelei called. They're threatening legal action, she said without preamble, claiming breach of contract, client poaching, and misappropriation of trade secrets. Exactly as Verity predicted, I replied. Yes, and exactly as we prepared for. I've reviewed all the documentation again. The client transfers were executed properly, with full disclosure to and consent from each client. You never signed a non-compete clause, and there are no trade secrets involved since all client information was either publicly available or provided directly by the clients themselves. So, we're on solid ground? Absolutely. But they don't know that yet. They're bluffing, hoping you'll panic. What's our next move? Let them bluster. I've requested all relevant documentation from their legal team. That will buy us some time while they scramble to find paperwork that doesn't exist. After hanging up, I crossed to the window, watching boats navigate the harbor. Verity had loved this view. When we'd looked at this office space together, just weeks before her death, she'd stood in this exact spot. Remember, Kenna, she'd said, when they realize what's happening, they'll try to intimidate you first. When that fails, they'll try to buy you. And when that fails, she'd turn to me, her face gaunt, but her eyes still fierce. That's when they'll show you exactly who they are. My phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. Kenna, it's Quinn. Can we talk? Not company business. Just talk. Quinn, the one who'd gotten the promotion I deserved. We'd never been close, but he'd always been less overtly political than the others. Still, I hesitated before replying. When and where? His response came quickly. Tonight? That cafe near your old apartment? I frowned. How did he know where I used to live? I'd moved 6 months ago and had never mentioned my new address at work. The Copper Kettle at 7, I replied, naming a cafe in a busy shopping district instead. I arrived early, choosing a table with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. Quinn walked in at exactly 7, scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked tired, the usual confidence in his stride missing. Thanks for meeting me, he said, sliding into the chair opposite mine. What's this about, Quinn? He ordered coffee before speaking again. Things are crazy at the office. The executive team is in complete meltdown mode, and that concerns me how? They're saying you stole clients, that you and Verity conspired to defraud the company. He leaned forward. They're building a case against you. There is no case. They've pulled 5 years of emails, looking for evidence. They're interviewing everyone who worked with you, asking if you ever discussed taking clients. I kept my expression neutral. Again, why should I care? Quinn sighed. Look, I know we weren't friends, but what they're doing, it's not right. They're trying to destroy you professionally. Why are you telling me this? He stared into his coffee for a long moment. Because Verity once did something similar for me, warned me when they were setting me up to fail. This was unexpected. Quinn had always seemed like one of them. Ambitious, political, willing to play the game. I owe her, he continued. And by extension, you. What exactly are they planning? They're contacting every client, claiming you misrepresented your authority to transfer the accounts. They're offering steep discounts to maintain relationships. And they're preparing to send cease and desist letters to all 23 businesses. I nodded slowly. Anything else? They've frozen Verity's final compensation package, claiming evidence of misconduct. They're using it as leverage with her family. This sent a surge of anger through me. Verity's sister had 2 children in college. That money was meant for them. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. Quinn hesitated. There's one more thing. They've offered me a bonus, a significant one, to provide evidence against you. And will you? There isn't any evidence to provide. He stood to leave. I never saw this meeting happening. Neither did you. After he left, I sat alone, processing this new information. They were more desperate than I'd anticipated. Targeting Verity's family crossed a line I hadn't expected even them to cross. I called Lorelei again. "They're freezing Verity's final compensation," I said when she answered. "I just heard from her sister's attorney," Lorelei confirmed. "They're claiming evidence of breach of fiduciary duty. Can they do that?" "They can try. It won't hold up, but it could tie up the funds for months." "That's exactly what they want. Her sister needs that money now." "I know. I'm working on it." I ended the call and headed home, my mind racing. This wasn't just about me anymore. They were punishing Verity's family to get to me. The knowledge sat like a stone in my stomach. The next morning, I received an email from the CEO himself, requesting a private meeting to resolve our differences amicably. I forwarded it to Lorelei without responding. Her reply was swift. "They're getting desperate. The legal threats aren't working, so now they're trying diplomacy. Stick to the plan." The plan. Verity's plan, now mine. A careful sequence of events designed to give me maximum leverage when the time came. We were still in the early stages, but already the company was reacting exactly as she'd predicted. By the end of the week, all 23 clients had confirmed they were staying with me. My phone had been blocked from receiving calls from the company's main numbers, and Lorelei was handling all legal communication. The initial panic had faded, replaced by a steady determination. I spent my days meeting with clients, setting up proper workspace, and establishing the foundation of my new business. Evenings were devoted to strategic planning. I slept better than I had in years. Then came the first real complication. Zara called on Friday afternoon, her voice tight with stress. "Kenna, we have a situation. Your former employer is telling our investors that our contract transfer was illegitimate. They're claiming it could invalidate our entire financing round." My grip on the phone tightened. "That's completely false. I know that, but our lead investor is spooked. They're talking about pulling out unless this gets resolved." Zara's startup had just secured crucial second-round funding. Losing that would be devastating. "Give me your investor's contact information," I said. "I'll have Lorelei reach out directly." "There's more," Zara continued. "They've offered to cut our service fees by 40% if we come back. That's hard to ignore in our position." This was the first crack in the wall. If Zara went back, others might follow. "I understand," I said carefully. "That's a significant discount. But we don't want to leave you," she added quickly. "You and Verity have been there from the beginning. We trust you." "Let me see what I can do," I promised. After hanging up, I paced my small office. This was an escalation I hadn't fully prepared for. They were targeting the most vulnerable clients first, the startups with investor pressure and tight budgets. I called Lorelei again, explaining the situation. "They're playing hardball," she agreed. "But so can we." "How? I can't match a 40% discount. I don't have the resources they do." "No, but you have something they don't." I could hear the smile in her voice. "You have Verity's contingency plan, I think." The next morning, I invited Zara to my office. When she arrived, Lorelei was already there, along with a man I'd never met, tall, silver-haired, with the confident bearing of someone used to being in charge. "Zara, this is Ambrose Tanner," I said, Verity's former mentor and the founder of her first investment group. Zara's eyes widened. Ambrose Tanner was something of a legend in startup circles, an early investor in dozens of now successful companies. "Miss Daswani," he said, extending his hand. "Verity spoke highly of your innovation." "Mr. Tanner," she stammered. "I had no idea you were involved with Kenna's company." "I wasn't, until yesterday," he replied, glancing at me. "But Verity asked me to keep an eye on certain situations that might arise after her passing. Your current predicament qualifies." For the next hour, Ambrose outlined a potential partnership that would not only resolve Zara's immediate investor concerns, but potentially accelerate her company's growth timeline. By the time she left, the crisis had transformed into an opportunity. "Thank you," I said to Ambrose after Zara had gone. "Verity never mentioned she'd spoken to you about this." "Verity kept many cards close to her chest," he replied. "She contacted me shortly before her death, explained what she was planning for you, and asked if I'd be willing to step in if certain situations arose. And you agreed? Just like that? Ambrose's expression softened. Verity saved my company 20 years ago when everyone else had written me off. I owed her. Besides, he added with a small smile, I've been watching those executives mismanage talent for years. It's about time someone taught them a lesson. Over the next 2 weeks, similar scenarios played out with other vulnerable clients. When my former company targeted them with aggressive discounts or investor pressure, I found ways to strengthen those relationships rather than simply trying to maintain them. For Wade's custom furniture business, I connected him with 3 new retail partners. For Lark's organic skincare line, I arranged a feature in a major lifestyle publication. Each solution was tailored specifically to the client's needs, demonstrating a level of personal attention my former company couldn't match. The executive team's tactics grew increasingly desperate. They attempted to contact my clients outside of business hours. They spread rumors about my company's financial stability. They even sent a junior account manager to stand outside my office building, intercepting clients as they arrived for meetings. Through it all, I maintained the calm demeanor Verity had modeled. Never let them see you sweat, she'd advised. The moment you react emotionally, they believe they've won. 3 weeks after my termination, I received another email from the CEO, marked urgent and confidential. This has gone far enough. It read, we're prepared to offer you a partnership position with full executive privileges if you return the West Coast accounts to company management. This offer expires in 48 hours. I forwarded it to Lorelei with a single question. Time? Her response was equally brief. Almost. That evening, I spread all my documentation across my dining table. Client contracts, transfer agreements, email correspondences, meeting notes. Everything meticulously organized and preserved. 5 months of careful preparation leading to this moment. My phone rang. Bryce's number. I answered out of curiosity. The CEO's offer is genuine, he said without greeting. Full partnership, corner office, executive compensation package. Sounds generous, I replied. It's more than generous, it's unprecedented. And what would my role be in this partnership? He hesitated. Strategic client management, meaning I'd bring back the West Coast accounts but wouldn't actually manage them. Details would be negotiated, of course. Of course, I echoed. And you? What's your role in this arrangement? Another hesitation. I've been asked to facilitate the transition, meaning you've been told to get me to agree at any cost, because the quarterly numbers are due next week, and the executive team is panicking. The silence confirmed my assessment. The offer expires tomorrow, he finally said. I suggest you consider it carefully. I always do. After hanging up, I sent a message to Lorelei. They've offered partnership. Getting desperate. Her reply came immediately. Perfect. Exactly on schedule. Meet tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring everything. The next morning, I arrived at Lorelei's office carrying a briefcase full of documents. She was waiting with a colleague I hadn't met before. A serious-looking woman introduced simply as Diane from the Financial Crimes Unit. My heart raced as I realized what was happening. This was the moment Verity had been building toward all along. Not just a plan for me to take clients and start my own business, but something much bigger. Ms. Ellis, Diane said, I understand you have information regarding potential financial irregularities at your former company. I looked at Lorelei, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I replied, opening my briefcase. I believe I do. The documents I placed on the table represented only a fraction of what Verity had compiled over 15 years. Evidence of systematic financial manipulation that went far beyond simple accounting tricks. Creative revenue recognition, hidden expenses, artificially inflated client contracts, a pattern of deception designed to boost executive bonuses while misleading shareholders. Verity discovered these discrepancies 3 years ago, I explained. She began documenting everything, building a case methodically. Why didn't she report it immediately? Diane asked. She tried. Internally first, following proper channels. When that failed, she approached a board member, confidentially. 2 weeks later, her department's budget was cut by 30%, and 3 of her staff were let go. Diane examined the documents carefully. And she shared all this with you? Not until she knew she was dying. She needed someone to continue what she'd started. The client transfers, Lorelai added. They weren't just about helping Kenna start her own business. They were about protecting these clients from what's coming. And what exactly is coming? Diane asked. I pulled out the final document, a detailed analysis showing the company had been systematically overcharging clients while under-delivering services, using complex contract language to disguise the practice. When this becomes public, I said quietly, the company's reputation will be destroyed. Verity wanted her clients protected before that happened. Diane gathered the documents carefully. This will take time to verify. Of course, I agreed. Verity understood that too. That's why she was so methodical in her documentation. As Diane left with the evidence, Lorelai turned to me with an approving nod. You've done exactly what Verity hoped you would. Maintained your composure, followed the plan, and delivered the final piece exactly when needed. So what happens now? I asked. Now we wait, but not for long. I left Lorelai's office feeling lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying had finally been set down. The last piece of Verity's plan was in motion. All those months of careful preparation had led to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from the CEO. Offer expires at 5 p.m. today. Last chance. I didn't bother responding. There was nothing left to say. Instead, I headed to my office by the water, where 3 client meetings were scheduled for the afternoon. Life would go on, business would continue, regardless of what happened next. As I unlocked the office door, my phone rang again. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was someone else from the company making a last-ditch effort. But something made me accept the call. Kenna Ellis speaking. Ms. Ellis. The voice was unfamiliar, authoritative. This is Detective Reeves with the Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to schedule a formal interview regarding the documentation you provided this morning. I closed my eyes, a mix of emotions washing over me. Of course, whatever you need. And Ms. Ellis, you might want to turn on the financial news. I hung up, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled up the financial news on my tablet. The headline instantly made my breath catch. Breaking. Securities investigation launched against major consulting firm amid fraud allegations. The accompanying article mentioned whistleblower documentation and systematic financial irregularities. The company's stock had already dropped 8% in pre-market trading. My phone immediately began buzzing with notifications. Clients texting to confirm their meetings were still on, Nell asking if I'd seen the news, and a final message from the CEO. What have you done? I set the tablet down and took a deep breath. This was the culmination of Verity's plan. Not just client transfers and my new business, but justice. The kind that couldn't be negotiated away or buried under legal threats. As the morning progressed, the news grew more detailed. Trading of the company's stock was temporarily halted after it plunged 20%. Financial analysts were dissecting the allegations. Former clients were being interviewed about their experiences. By noon, the first executives were being photographed leaving the building with security escorts. By 2, the board had announced an emergency meeting. By 4, Bryce and 3 others had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Through it all, I conducted my client meetings as scheduled, though everyone wanted to discuss the breaking news. Did you know? Mateo asked during our afternoon conference call. Let's focus on your upcoming product launch, I replied, neither confirming nor denying. That evening, Lorelai called. The SEC has requested formal interviews with 17 current and former employees. Your name is at the top of the list. I assumed it would be. They've also frozen all executive bonuses and compensation packages from the past 3 years. I thought of Verity's sister and her college-aged children. What about posthumous benefits? Will Verity's family still get frozen out? Actually, no. I've already confirmed her final compensation package is being processed separately due to special circumstances. Apparently, no one wants to appear to be punishing a deceased whistleblower's family right now. I smiled, feeling a weight lift. Good. That's what matters most. There's something else, Lorelai added. They found Verity's original report from 3 years ago. The one that was supposedly lost when she first tried to report the irregularities internally. It was buried in a restricted executive file server. So they knew, all along, Every single one of them. The entire executive team was complicit. I thanked Lorelei and ended the call, walking to the window of my apartment to watch the city lights come on as dusk settled. Everything was unfolding exactly as Verity had planned. The company that had systematically marginalized us both was now facing the consequences of its actions. My phone buzzed with yet another message. Quinn, this time. They're looking for scapegoats. Bryce is claiming you and Verity fabricated everything. I wasn't surprised. Let him. The documentation speaks for itself. I've been asked to provide a statement about your work practices. And will you? I'll tell the truth. That you were the most ethical person in that building. I set my phone down, oddly touched by his loyalty. Perhaps not everyone from my old life was an enemy after all. The next morning, Detective Reeves arrived at my office for our formal interview. For 3 hours, I walked her through every document, every discrepancy, every attempt Verity had made to address the issues through proper channels. She kept meticulous records, Reeves observed, studying a particularly detailed spreadsheet comparing reported client billings to actual services rendered. Verity believed in accountability, I replied. She used to say that integrity isn't what you do when everyone's watching. It's what you do when you think no one is. After Reeves left, I sat alone in my office, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. Verity should have been here to see this. She'd orchestrated everything so perfectly, yet wouldn't witness the results of her planning. My phone rang, an unfamiliar number with the area code from Verity's hometown. Kenna? This is Iris, Verity's sister. My heart quickened. Iris, yes, how are you? I just received notification that Verity's benefits are being released. All of them. The company's legal team suddenly became very cooperative. I'm glad to hear that. There's something else. Her voice softened. Verity left a letter for you with my attorney. He was instructed to deliver it 1 month after everything happened. Would you like me to mail it? Or I can come to you, I said quickly, if that's all right. 2 days later, I sat in Iris's modest living room, holding an envelope with my name written in Verity's distinctive handwriting. Iris had given me privacy, stepping outside to tend her garden. The letter was dated 1 week before Verity died. Kenna, if you're reading this, then everything has proceeded according to plan. The company is facing investigation, the clients are safe with you, and my family's financial security is preserved. What you don't yet know is why I chose you. It wasn't just your competence or your integrity, though both are remarkable. It was because 3 years ago, when I first discovered the financial irregularities, you were the only person who noticed something was wrong. With the company, yes, but more importantly, with me. You asked if I was okay when no one else saw past my carefully maintained facade. You offered help without knowing what you were offering to help with. In that moment, I knew you were different. The company will try to paint me as vindictive, a disgruntled employee orchestrating their downfall from beyond the grave. Perhaps there's some truth in that. But my real motivation was justice. For myself, for you, for every person whose career was stifled because they wouldn't play by corrupted rules. The portfolio I left you isn't just clients, it's opportunity. Build something better than what we came from. Create the company we always deserved to work for. There's one final thing. In the safety deposit box where you kept our documentation, you'll find a key to a storage unit. Inside is everything you'll need to fully understand the depth of what we've uncovered. Use it wisely. With respect and confidence, Verity. I folded the letter carefully, tears blurring my vision. Even now, months after her death, Verity was still guiding me, still offering wisdom from beyond. The next morning, I visited the storage unit. Inside was a single filing cabinet containing detailed dossiers on every executive at the company, their financial dealings, their decision histories, their vulnerabilities. Information gathered meticulously over 15 years. Among these was a separate folder labeled Board Connections, documentation of how each board member had been selected not for their oversight capabilities, but for their willingness to look the other way. Copies of emails, meeting recordings, evidence so comprehensive it took my breath away. I immediately called Lorelei and Detective Reeves. This wasn't just about financial irregularities anymore. This was systematic corruption at every level. Within days, the investigation expanded. The board chairman resigned. 3 additional executives were placed on leave. The company's stock continued its downward spiral. Through it all, my business grew steadily. The clients who had trusted Verity, and now trusted me, remained loyal. Word spread about a new consulting firm that prioritized ethical practices and client success above all else. 6 months after my termination, I leased a larger office space in the same waterfront building. My team had grown to include 5 full-time employees, including Nell, who had resigned from our former company the day after the investigation became public. On the morning we moved into the new space, a package arrived. A framed photograph of Verity standing on the beach near her hometown, looking out at the horizon with characteristic determination. A note from Iris accompanied it. She'd want this in your new office. I hung it in the reception area, directly across from the entrance where every visitor would see it. Beneath it, I placed a small plaque with the words that had guided me through the past year. Success isn't climbing their ladder, it's building your own. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor, Quinn, looking uncomfortable in the unfamiliar surroundings. Nice place, he said, glancing around. Very different from the old office. That's the point, I replied. What brings you here? I've been offered a position at what's left of the company. There were structuring after the investigation. Congratulations? He shook his head. I turned it down. It doesn't feel right, being rewarded for surviving the purge when I was part of the system that enabled everything. I studied him, seeing genuine regret in his expression. So what will you do? I don't know. Start over somewhere. Try to do better. I considered him for a long moment. We have an opening, junior position, less money than you're used to, but it's honest work. His surprise was evident. You'd hire me? After everything? Verity believed in second chances, and you did warn me when you didn't have to. The following week, our team gathered for the official opening of the expanded office. Clients, friends, even some former colleagues who had reached out after leaving the old company. Iris came with her children, visibly moved by the photograph of her sister, prominently displayed. As I looked around at what we had built, not just a business, but a community founded on the principles Verity had valued, I felt her presence as strongly as if she were standing beside me. The investigation continued to unfold, revealing deeper layers of misconduct than even Verity had documented. The company that had once seemed invincible was fighting for survival, its reputation in tatters, its leadership disbanded. But that wasn't my concern anymore. My focus was on building something new, something better, not revenge for its own sake, but justice that created opportunity for growth. In the end, the most powerful revenge wasn't destroying what had hurt us. It was creating something so much better that the comparison itself became a judgment. Verity had known that all along, and now, so did I. If you've made it to the end of this story, I hope it resonated with you in some way. Maybe you've faced similar challenges in your career, or perhaps you've witnessed the kind of systematic problems Kenna and Verity confronted. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up against workplace injustice? Or have you been lucky enough to have a mentor like Verity in your professional life? Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps build the kind of supportive community we all deserve. Thanks for listening. I stood in conference room B, staring at the single sheet of paper that had just shattered my career. We're restructuring the team, Kieran said, not quite meeting my eyes. His fingers tapped an anxious rhythm on the polished surface of the table between us. Your position has been eliminated, effective immediately. 7 years. 7 years of missed birthdays, skipped vacations, and 3 a.m. strategy sessions, all condensed into a 15-minute termination meeting and a severance check that felt insultingly small in my trembling hands. The board made this decision last night, Kieran continued, his voice carefully neutral. It's nothing personal, Siv. Nothing personal. As if I hadn't just closed the Westbrook deal last week, a contract worth over $400,000 that had taken me 6 months to secure. As if I hadn't increased our client retention rate by 42% in the past year alone. Adele from Human Resources slid another document across the table. We'll need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement and return all company property before leaving the building. I signed mechanically, mind racing ahead to the implications. The termination was effective immediately. No transition period, no handover of accounts, no chance to say goodbye to clients I'd cultivated relationships with for years. Your personal belongings will be packed and delivered to your home address, Adele added. Not unkindly. I nodded, maintaining the composed expression I'd perfected over years of high-stakes negotiations. They wouldn't see me break. Not here, not now. As I stood to leave, Kieran finally looked directly at me. One more thing, Siv. Any company information in your possession needs to be returned immediately. That includes all client lists, contact information, contract details, everything. A chill ran through me. Did he know? Could he possibly have discovered that I'd downloaded the entire client database to my personal drive last week? I'd done it as a precaution after overhearing Kieran and the CFO whispering about necessary cuts in the break room. Of course, I replied smoothly. I understand my obligations. The security guard waiting outside, Reed, who had greeted me by name every morning for 7 years, now avoided my eyes as he escorted me to clear out my desk. 20 minutes later, I stood on the sidewalk, cardboard box in hand, watching the revolving door spin without me. My phone buzzed with a text from Kieran. You need to return everything, Siv. All company property and information. The desperation in the message was telling. They were worried, but not specific enough to indicate they knew exactly what I had. I had always been the company's relationship builder, the one who remembered client birthdays and children's names, the one who turned cold contacts into loyal partners. The database I'd saved wasn't just names and numbers. It represented potential consulting contracts worth over $475,000. What Kieran didn't realize was that I hadn't just lost a job today. I'd gained freedom and the leverage to use it. My phone buzzed again. Legal will contact you tomorrow if we don't receive confirmation that all company information has been returned. I slipped the phone into my pocket without responding and hailed a taxi. As the city blurred past the window, I made my decision. They had underestimated me for the last time. If you've ever been blindsided by betrayal, you know that hollow feeling that turns to fire in your chest. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe to hear how justice eventually found its way back to me. Drop a comment if you've ever had to rebuild from ashes. I'd love to know I'm not alone in this journey. My name is Siv Talwar. I grew up watching my grandmother run a small alterations shop in our neighborhood, turning scraps of forgotten fabric into beautiful creations while teaching me that preparation prevents desperation. When customers failed to pay, she always had contingency plans. Never let them see you scramble, she'd tell me, pins held between her lips. I carried that wisdom through college, working 3 jobs to cover what my scholarship didn't. While classmates partied, I built spreadsheets, tracking industry trends and identifying future opportunities. Professors called me pathologically prepared. They weren't wrong. Landing the job at my former company had felt like destiny. The interview with Kieran had lasted 3 hours. We connected instantly over shared visions of relationship-based business development. Most people in this industry focus on transactions, he'd said. You understand it's about building trust. For 7 years, I proved him right. I transformed our client acquisition strategy, bringing in businesses that had rejected previous approaches. My methods became case studies in the company training manual. Last year, when I secured the Tremont account, a client so prestigious that competitors had been courting them for decades, Kieran had actually hugged me during the celebration dinner. The future of this company, he'd called me, glass raised in a toast. The future. Until a Tuesday morning in April when I became expendable. Back in my apartment, I kicked off my heels and opened my personal laptop. The encrypted folder contained everything: client contracts, communication preferences, decision-maker profiles, active proposals. Knowledge worth far more than my severance package. My phone rang with an unknown number. Siv? It's Davi Tremont. My heart skipped. Davi was the operations director at my former company's most prestigious client. I just heard what happened, he continued, genuine concern in his voice. Is it true? Unfortunately, yes, this morning. That's surprising. You're the only reason we signed with them in the first place. I sighed. Apparently, I'm a budget liability now. Well, they've already assigned someone new to our account. Pen, she called to introduce herself an hour ago. Pen, my stomach tightened. The recent hire who had been shadowing me for weeks, supposedly to learn from the best. Now it made sense. She had been training to replace me all along. Siv, Davi continued, hesitation evident in his voice. We have some concerns about this transition. Our contract renewal is coming up next quarter. The conversation ended with Davi suggesting we catch up soon, code for keeping channels open. As night fell, I meticulously organized the client information, identifying relationships most likely to follow me versus those loyal to the company brand. My phone continually lit up with messages from colleagues expressing shock, from clients inquiring about my future plans, and repeatedly from Kieran demanding confirmation that I had returned all company information. I didn't respond to Kieran. Instead, I composed an email to Rune, a former colleague who had left last year to launch his own small consulting practice. Rune, we should talk. Coffee tomorrow? I have an idea that might benefit us both. His response was immediate. Heard what happened. Those fools. Coffee at 10, Loomies on Park. As I finally prepared for bed, exhaustion weighing my limbs, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. Siv, it's Drew from finance. You should know, your layoff wasn't about restructuring. Kieran told the board you were taking excessive commissions on your deals. I thought you deserved the truth. Sleep came in restless bursts that night. By morning, cold fury had replaced shock. This wasn't just about professional survival anymore. This was about justice. Loomy's coffee shop buzzed with morning commuters when I arrived. Rune had claimed a corner table, 2 ceramic mugs waiting. He'd always been observant. It was what made him an excellent analyst, and his eyes widened slightly as he studied my face. You look remarkably composed for someone whose career just imploded, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. Years of practice, I replied, wrapping my hands around the mug. Perfect temperature. He remembered I preferred it not too hot. So what's this idea? And please tell me it involves making Kieran regret the day he was born. I smiled for what felt like the first time in days. It might, eventually. But first, let's talk about partnership. Over the next hour, I outlined my vision. A boutique consulting firm that would provide the same services I had mastered at my former company, but with the personalized approach that larger firms couldn't match. Rune's existing business infrastructure, combined with my client relationships, could create something formidable. Quickly. The relationships you're talking about, Rune said cautiously, stirring his coffee. They're with the company's clients, not yours personally. There could be legal implications. Non-compete clauses only prevent direct solicitation, I replied. If clients approach us because they're dissatisfied with their current service provider, that's different. Rune's eyes narrowed. And why would they suddenly become dissatisfied? I took another sip of coffee. Because their trusted contact has been replaced by someone inexperienced, and because we're going to offer something better. As we continued planning, my phone vibrated on the table. A text from Kieran. Legal is concerned about missing files. We need to talk ASAP. I showed the message to Rune, whose eyebrows shot up. They know you took something? They suspect, but can't prove it, I said with more confidence than I felt. And technically, I didn't take anything that wasn't already in my possession as part of my job. Rune looked nervous. Siv, if they come after you legally, they won't. I interrupted. They can't afford the publicity of admitting how poorly they managed client transitions. Besides, by the time they figure out what's happening, it will be too late. But as I left the coffee shop an hour later, doubt crept in. Was I underestimating Kieran? He hadn't become a director by being stupid. If he suspected I had the client database, he would be preparing his own countermoves. I needed to accelerate my timeline. Back home, I began making calls, not to clients, which would violate my non-compete, but to other former colleagues who had left under similar circumstances, people who might share my motivation for seeing the company's clients receive better service elsewhere. By evening, I had assembled a small but talented team. Rune for operations, Zara for design, Tao for technical implementation, and myself as lead strategist. Each brought unique skills and, importantly, existing relationships that complemented mine. We gathered that night at my apartment, spreading notes and laptops across my dining table. Energy crackled between us, the excitement of creation mixed with the vindicating thrill of potential retribution. "We'll need a name," Zara said, opening her design software. "Something that reflects transformation," Tao suggested. "That's essentially what we're offering clients, a transformation from their current experience." As we brainstormed, my phone rang. "Kieran." The room fell silent as I stared at the screen. "Are you going to answer?" Rune asked quietly. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. "Hello, Kieran." "Siv." His voice was tight. "We need to discuss the client information you accessed before leaving. It has identified unauthorized downloads from our secure server last week." My heart raced, but my voice remained steady. "I accessed information relevant to my position, as I had every day for 7 years. There was nothing unauthorized about it." "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The board is considering legal action unless you return all company property and information immediately." The threat hung in the air. My new team watched me, tension visible in their postures. "That's interesting," I said slowly, "considering Drew told me why you really pushed for my termination. The lies you told the board about my commission structure." There was a telling pause before Kieran responded. "Drew shouldn't be discussing board matters with former employees. And you shouldn't be making false accusations to cover your own mismanagement," I countered. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans this evening." I ended the call before he could respond, my hand trembling slightly. "He sounds worried," Zara observed with a small smile. "He should be," I replied, turning back to our planning session. "Now, about that company name." By midnight, we had our foundation, Keystone Solutions, a new consulting firm built on the strengths of our collective experiences. We had roles, responsibilities, and a timeline for launch. What we didn't have yet was confirmation that clients would follow. As my team left with renewed purpose, I checked my email one last time before bed. There, waiting in my inbox, was a message that made my breath catch. Subject: Consulting Opportunity, from Davi Tremont. "Siv, heard rumors you might be starting something new. Our contract with your former employer has a 30-day cancellation clause. Let's talk soon about potential alternatives. The service since your departure has been disappointing." I smiled at the screen. It was beginning. But as I prepared for bed, another message arrived. This one far less welcome. "This is your final warning, Siv. Return all company information or face legal consequences. We know what you took. Kieran." Attached was a formal letter from the company's legal department, threatening immediate action unless I complied within 24 hours. The game was escalating faster than I had anticipated, and the stakes had just gotten much higher. Sleep eluded me that night as I weighed my options. By morning, I had made my decision. This was no longer just about rebuilding my career or even about justice. This was war. I woke before dawn, my mind already churning with strategy. The legal threat sitting in my inbox required immediate attention, but not in the way Kieran expected. He was counting on fear to drive my response. Instead, I chose calculation. I called Tao first. "I need you to analyze the company's security logs. Can you determine exactly what they can prove I downloaded?" "I still have backdoor access," he replied, voice low despite the early hour. "Give me an hour." Next, I contacted a former classmate who had become a respected employment attorney. Nix listened carefully as I explained the situation, including the revelation about Kieran's lies to the board. "They're bluffing," she concluded after reviewing the legal notice. "If they had definitive proof, they would have included specifics. This is a fishing expedition. So how do I respond?" "Technically, not at all yet. You have 24 hours. Use them wisely." By mid-morning, our improvised team had gathered at Rune's small office space. Tao arrived last, dark circles under his eyes but wearing a triumphant expression. "Good news and better news," he announced, connecting his laptop to the conference room display. "The security logs show you accessed the client database last Tuesday, but there's no record of a download because you didn't use their download function. You manually copied entries while logged in. Perfectly normal activity for your position. Relief washed through me. And the better news? Pen, your replacement? She's been desperately contacting clients for the past 2 days. Based on the internal messaging I can still access, she's hemorrhaging relationships faster than anyone anticipated. Zara leaned forward. Why? What's she doing wrong? Everything. Tao laughed. Yesterday, she called the Tremont Group's procurement director by the wrong name 3 times, then asked about a project they completed months ago as if it were still in progress. Davi must be livid, I murmured, remembering how particular he was about details. That's putting it mildly. He's called Kieran twice, demanding to speak with you. A slow smile spread across my face. Perfect. We spent the next hours refining our launch strategy. Rather than directly soliciting clients, we would announce our new venture through industry channels where former clients would naturally see it. Meanwhile, I would respond to inquiries that came to me directly, like Davi's email, with careful language that avoided violating non-compete clauses. Just after noon, my phone rang with Davi's number. I've been trying to reach you, he said without preamble. This new person they've assigned to our account is completely unprepared. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Transitions can be challenging. This isn't a transition issue. She doesn't understand our business model or our 5-year expansion plan, the one you helped us develop. His frustration vibrated through the phone. Kieran keeps insisting everything will smooth out, but we have deliverables due next week. I chose my next words carefully. I'm not in a position to discuss my former employer's internal matters, Davi, but I am establishing a new consulting practice focused on relationship-based strategic planning. The line went quiet for a moment. How soon could you be operational? We're launching officially in 2 weeks, but for the right client partnerships, we could expedite certain services. Send me information as soon as you have it, he said. And Siv? There are others who've been asking about you. After ending the call, I shared the development with my team. Excitement buzzed through the room until Rune raised the critical question. What about Kieran's legal threat? The deadline is tonight. I nodded. I'm drafting a response now, one that will buy us time while making them second-guess their approach. By late afternoon, with Nix's guidance, I had crafted a carefully worded reply. I acknowledge receipt of your correspondence. To clarify, I have not retained any proprietary information outside the scope of my normal job functions. Any suggestion otherwise is both factually incorrect and potentially defamatory. I remain open to a constructive dialogue regarding transition matters should that be necessary. Regarding the circumstances of my termination, I have received concerning information about misrepresentations made to the board. I trust this can be addressed professionally without further escalation. This is brilliant, Nix said after reviewing the final draft. Non-threatening, but with a clear implication that you know something that could damage Kieran personally. I sent the email, then waited. The response came faster than expected. Not from legal, but from Kieran himself. We should talk in person. Coffee tomorrow? Just you and me. My team advised caution. It could be a trap, Zara warned. They might be recording to get you to admit to taking the database. Or it could be Kieran trying to save himself, I countered. Either way, I need to know what he's planning. We agreed I would meet him, but with precautions. I would arrive early to select the location, Rune would sit nearby as a witness, and I would say nothing that could be construed as an admission. That night, as I prepared for the confrontation, Drew from finance called again. There's more you should know, he said, voice barely above a whisper. After you left, Kieran told the executive team you had been planning to poach clients for months. He's building a narrative that you've been deliberately undermining the company. My hand tightened around the phone. Why would he say that? Because 3 major clients have called expressing concerns about their new account managers. The Tremont Group is already talking about reviewing their contract. Kieran needs a scapegoat, and the board believes him? For now. But the CFO is asking questions about why our most valuable relationship manager was terminated without a transition plan. Drew paused. Watch yourself tomorrow. Kieran's desperate. Sleep eluded me again that night. Instead, I paced my apartment, rehearsing responses to every possible scenario. By morning, I felt prepared for anything, except the sight of Kieran waiting at the cafe, looking not threatening but broken. Gray shadows underlined his eyes. His normally immaculate appearance was rumpled, as if he'd slept in his clothes. When he saw me approach, something like relief washed over his face. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat across from him. Rune was positioned 3 tables away, pretending to work on his laptop. "I was curious about what couldn't be said over email," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Kieran glanced around nervously before leaning forward. "I need your help, Siv." Whatever I had expected, it wasn't this. My help? The Tremont Group is threatening to cancel their contract. Davi won't even take my calls anymore. Penn is drowning, and the board is asking why we let you go in the first place. I kept my expression carefully blank. "That sounds like an internal management issue." "It's becoming an existential one," he admitted, voice cracking slightly. "2 other major clients are now expressing concerns. The board has scheduled an emergency meeting for tomorrow. And what does this have to do with me?" He took a deep breath. "I want to offer you your job back. Higher salary, director title, more autonomy." For a moment, I was speechless. The audacity was breathtaking. To fire me unceremoniously, then expect me to rescue him from the consequences. "That's an interesting proposition," I finally managed. "I know it's unexpected," he continued, desperation seeping into his tone. "But we both know you're the only one who can salvage these relationships." "The same relationships you accused me of trying to poach?" His eyes widened. How did you... It doesn't matter how I know, Kieran. What matters is that you fired me without cause, lied about my performance to the board, and are now facing the natural consequences of those actions. "I made a mistake," he admitted, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "A terrible one. But this isn't just about me. There are 50 jobs at stake if these contracts cancel." The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. Yet underneath my anger, I felt a flicker of curiosity. This desperate version of Kieran was revealing vulnerabilities I could potentially leverage. "Why did you really fire me?" I asked, holding his gaze. He looked away first. "The board was pressuring for cost reductions. Your compensation package was substantial after the Tremont commission, and rather than find other solutions, you sacrificed me and lied to justify it." "Yes," he whispered. I let the admission hang between us for a long moment. "I'm not coming back, Kieran. Please. I've already established my own consulting practice with several former colleagues. We launch officially in 2 weeks." The color drained from his face. "You can't. The non-compete prevents me from soliciting your clients directly. It doesn't prevent them from seeking me out after receiving substandard service." I stood, gathering my bag. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a business to build." "Siv, wait." Panic sharpened his voice. "If clients leave because of you, the company will pursue legal action. You know too much about our internal systems, our pricing structures. We'll claim trade secret violations." I paused, looking down at him. That would be unfortunate for everyone, especially if certain board members learned about the actual circumstances of my termination. His expression hardened. "Is that a threat?" "Just an observation about consequences," I replied evenly. "Good luck with your board meeting tomorrow." As I walked away, Rune quickly gathered his things to follow. Outside, the spring air felt electric against my skin. "That was intense," Rune said, falling into step beside me. "What now?" "Now we accelerate everything. Launch in 1 week instead of 2. And I need to meet with Davi immediately." Davi agreed to meet that afternoon at a quiet restaurant near his office. His handshake was firm, his expression a mixture of relief and curiosity. "I appreciate you making time," he said as we settled at a corner table, "especially given the circumstances." The circumstances being that my former employer is struggling to maintain the quality of service you've come to expect, I suggested mildly. He smiled. "Precisely. Though Kieran called this morning promising a more experienced replacement by next week." "Did he mention who?" "No, but he seemed unusually anxious. Actually used the word please several times." Davi studied me thoughtfully. "I get the feeling there's more happening behind the scenes." "There usually is," I agreed, sliding a sleek folder across the table. "This is a preliminary overview of the services my new firm can provide, starting as early as next Monday." Davi opened the folder, eyebrows rising as he scanned the contents. This is comprehensive, and these rates are competitive. We're structured for efficiency. No bloated management layers, no unnecessary overhead. He nodded slowly, continuing to read. And your team includes Tao Chen? The same Tao who developed our custom analytics dashboard last year? The very same, along with Zara and Rune, both of whom you've worked with previously. A formidable combination. He closed the folder, his decision evident in his eyes before he spoke. I'll need to review this with my team, but I think we can safely say the Tremont Group would prefer continuity in our strategic planning. I kept my expression professionally pleased, but inside, triumph roared. We would be honored to continue supporting your vision, Davi. I should mention, he added, lowering his voice slightly, I've been fielding calls from other clients in similar situations. Your name keeps coming up. By the time I left the restaurant, Tremont hadn't just agreed to become our first client. Davi had offered to make introductions to 3 other businesses in their network. The pieces were falling into place faster than I had dared hope. I called an emergency meeting with my team to share the developments and adjust our timeline. 1 week to launch is ambitious, Zara cautioned as we gathered that evening. The branding materials, the service agreements, the infrastructure, Helex agreements, will make it happen, Rune interrupted, energy radiating from him. This is our moment. Tao was already typing furiously on his laptop. I can have the client portal operational by Monday. Basic functionality first, refinements later. As we worked late into the night, finalizing details and dividing responsibilities, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Board meeting moved up to tomorrow morning. Kieran fighting for his job. Thought you should know, Drew. I showed the message to my team. The pressure is mounting faster than expected. Good, Rune said firmly. Let him sweat, but part of me wondered if we were underestimating Kieran's desperation. Cornered predators are at their most dangerous. My concern proved justified the next morning. When Nix called, her voice tight with urgency. They've filed for an emergency injunction, she said without preamble, claiming you stole trade secrets and are actively sabotaging client relationships. They're seeking to prevent you from launching your business. My stomach dropped. On what grounds? They're claiming they have evidence you downloaded proprietary information. Someone named Penn provided an affidavit stating she saw you copying client data the week before your termination. That's impossible, I breathed. She wouldn't have had access to see what I was doing on my computer. They're also claiming unusual access patterns to the client database from your login credentials. Tao had confirmed there was no record of downloads. How could they? Then it hit me. They're fabricating evidence. Possibly, Nix agreed. But the judge granted a temporary hearing for tomorrow morning. This is moving extremely fast, Civ. After ending the call, I gathered my team for an emergency meeting. As I explained the situation, their expressions shifted from shock to determination. They're bluffing, Tao insisted. I verified the logs myself. Bluff or not, we need to be prepared, I replied. Nix is pulling together our defense, but we need a contingency plan in case the injunction is granted. Rune leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. What about Drew? Could he provide counter-evidence about what really happened? I don't want to put his job at risk, I said, though the idea had merit. Let's save that as a last resort. As we strategized our response, my phone rang with another unknown number. I answered cautiously. Is this Civ Talwar? A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. Yes. Who's calling? My name is Indra Walsh. I'm a board member at your former company. I believe we need to talk. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. About what, exactly? About Kieran's management decisions, the circumstances of your departure, and why 3 major clients are suddenly threatening to terminate their contracts. Could we meet privately, today, if possible? I covered the phone and whispered the situation to my team. Their reactions were mixed, concern about a potential trap, but also recognition of an extraordinary opportunity. I can meet at 3 p.m., I finally told her, at the Winter Garden in the Barstow building. I chose the location deliberately. A public atrium with multiple exits, too noisy for effective recording, but with private seating areas where conversations wouldn't be overheard. Indra arrived precisely on time, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that radiated authority. I recognized her from company events, always observant, rarely speaking unless her words carried weight. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I'll be direct. The board received concerning information about your termination that contradicts Kieran's explanation." "What explanation did he provide?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral. "Initially, that your position was eliminated in a restructuring. Then, when clients began complaining, that you had been planning to leave and take clients with you." She paused, studying my reaction. "Yesterday, when pressed further, he claimed you had become difficult to work with and were demanding unreasonable compensation." I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped me. 3 different stories. Interesting. Indeed. Indra's expression remained serious. "This morning, he presented evidence that you stole proprietary information before leaving. Yet, our CFO has raised questions about the authenticity of this evidence. Because it's fabricated," I stated flatly. She nodded slowly. "That's our suspicion as well. What's not fabricated, however, is the client exodus we're facing. The Tremont Group has formally notified us of their intent to terminate their contract." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, not entirely honestly. "Are you?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The board has called an emergency session for this evening. Kieran's future with the company will be decided." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because we're exploring all options to salvage these client relationships." She leaned forward slightly, "including potential collaboration with your new venture. Of all possible scenarios, this was one I hadn't anticipated." "Collaboration?" "A strategic partnership. Your firm would manage specific high-value client relationships, with our company providing back-end support and resources." The offer was both brilliant and revealing. They were desperate enough to consider sharing revenue rather than losing clients entirely. "That's an interesting proposition," I said carefully, "though it would require dropping the legal action against me and my team." "That's already being discussed," she assured me. "The injunction was Kieran's initiative, not the board's." As our conversation continued, the outlines of a potential arrangement emerged, one that would allow my new company to grow rapidly with institutional support, while giving my former employer time to rebuild their client service capabilities. By the time we parted, Indra had invited me to present the partnership concept to the board the following week. "After certain personnel changes are implemented," she added meaningfully. I returned to my team with this unexpected development. Their reactions ranged from cautious optimism to outright suspicion. "It could be a trap to delay our launch while they try to recover the client relationships themselves," Zara warned. "Or it could be exactly what it seems, a pragmatic business decision," Rune countered. "They're facing a client exodus and need to stop the bleeding." As we debated late into the evening, another text arrived from Drew. "Kieran terminated effective immediately. Board voted unanimously. Meeting tomorrow to discuss strategic partnership opportunities." "What did you do?" I showed the message to my team, a complex mix of emotions washing through me. Vindication, certainly, but also a strange emptiness where my anger had been. "So what now?" Tao asked, breaking the silence. "Do we partner with them or continue independently?" I considered the question carefully. The partnership offered advantages: immediate legitimacy, back-office support, reduced legal risk, but it also meant compromising the complete independence we had envisioned. "We proceed with our launch as planned," I decided finally, "but we keep the dialogue open with the board. Let's see what they're really offering before making any commitments." The next morning, as we prepared for the injunction hearing, Nix called with surprising news. "The complaint has been withdrawn," she announced. "No hearing necessary." Relief flooded through me. The board must have intervened. Most likely. I also received a formal request for partnership discussions from their corporate counsel. They're moving quickly. Over the next week, events unfolded with dizzying speed. The injunction threat disappeared completely. Kieran's personal belongings were reportedly packed and removed from his office, the same unceremonious exit he had orchestrated for me. Our company launched as scheduled, with the Tremont Group as our anchor client. 3 other major clients followed within days. The partnership discussions with my former employer evolved into a more limited arrangement. We would collaborate on specific projects where our expertise complemented theirs, but maintain our independence. 1 month after my termination, I sat in a boardroom, not as an employee, but as the CEO of a thriving consulting practice, negotiating terms with the very company that had discarded me. Across the table sat Indra and the executive team, minus Kiran. Their expressions were respectful, even deferential, a stark contrast to that fateful day in Conference Room B. Before we conclude, Indra said as our discussion wound down, the board wishes to formally apologize for the circumstances of your departure, Siv. It's clear now that it was based on inaccurate information and poor judgment. I nodded my acknowledgement, maintaining the professional composure I had perfected over years of high-stakes negotiations. Apology accepted. I prefer to focus on the future opportunities our collaboration presents. As we signed the preliminary agreement, I felt no need to mention the client database still securely stored on my encrypted drive, the one I had never actually needed to use. The true power had never been in the data itself, but in the relationships I had built, the trust I had earned, and the reputation for excellence I had established over years of dedicated service. My revenge wasn't accomplished through exposing secrets or damaging the company. It came through building something better, something that forced them to recognize exactly what they had lost when they discarded me. As I gathered my materials to leave, Indra walked me to the elevator. You know, she said thoughtfully, when Kiran first suggested terminating you, I was the only board member who objected. I said it would come back to haunt us. I smiled as the elevator doors opened. Prophetic, not prophecy, she replied. Just experience. I've learned that how you treat people always returns to you eventually, for better or worse. Stepping into the elevator, I felt the weight of the past month finally lifting. In that case, I said as the doors began to close, I look forward to a very positive relationship moving forward. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more tales of professional resilience and strategic thinking. Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove your true value later? Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes our greatest achievements come after our most difficult setbacks. Remember, success isn't just about climbing to the top. It's about how gracefully you rebuild when someone tries to knock you down. You're worthless, a complete waste of company resources. The words sliced across the festive atmosphere of the holiday party. My manager, Everett, stood in front of me, his face contorted with rage, spittle flying from his mouth as he continued his verbal assault. The string lights blurred through my tears as 50 colleagues fell silent around us, watching this public execution of my dignity. My crime? Suggesting improvements to our failing marketing campaign, improvements he'd rejected for months. I stood perfectly still, champagne flute steady in my hand while he continued his tirade about my incompetence. 3 years of this treatment flashed through my mind, my ideas dismissed, then mysteriously reappearing as his, my overtime unacknowledged, my achievements attributed to everyone but me. His wife Naomi touched his arm, clearly embarrassed. Honey, maybe. No, I interrupted softly. That's not what the board told me when they made me your new boss yesterday. He dropped his glass. Champagne splashed across his expensive shoes as whispers erupted around us. Naomi gasped, eyes widening in recognition. She'd been at the same yoga studio last week when I'd received the call confirming my promotion, a detail I hadn't connected until this moment. Everett's face drained of color as he stared at me. This is ridiculous, he sputtered, looking around for support. There must be a mistake. The mistake, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart, was thinking nobody would notice. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever had that moment when everything inside you screams to run away, to hide from confrontation, but instead, you find yourself standing your ground? If you've ever faced someone who tried to diminish you, this story might resonate with you. Stay with me until the end, because what unfolded changed not just my career, but my entire understanding of power. My name is Andy Mercer. I'm 32, analytical to a fault, and until recently, I was known as the quiet problem solver in our marketing department, the one who worked weekends to rescue failing campaigns but somehow never appeared in the success stories. I was raised by a single mom who taught me that hard work eventually pays off. For 3 years at Thompson Media Consultancy, I kept believing that. I joined the company with a master's degree and boundless enthusiasm. Everett became my direct supervisor 6 months later. He was charismatic, confident, the kind of person who dominated rooms without trying. His reputation as a marketing genius preceded him. The first time he took credit for my work, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. The second time, I wondered if I'd somehow failed to communicate my contributions clearly. By the third time, I recognized the pattern but convinced myself that speaking up would only label me as difficult. I watched as Everett systematically harvested ideas from every woman on our team. Lucia's client engagement strategy became Everett's revolutionary approach. Tessa's digital innovation framework appeared in his presentation to the executive team with his name on every slide. "It's just how things work," whispered Tessa when I questioned it. "You get used to it or you leave." But I couldn't accept that. Not when our team was genuinely brilliant. Not when I saw the resignation in the eyes of women who'd once been passionate about their work. 6 months before that holiday party, I started documenting everything. Not in a vindictive way, initially. It was just to validate my own sanity. I created a spreadsheet tracking project outcomes, noting which ideas came from which team members, and how credit was ultimately assigned. The data told a startling story. Projects conceptualized primarily by women outperformed others by 34%, despite receiving fewer resources and less executive support. The pattern was unmistakable. I might have kept this information to myself indefinitely if not for Vivienne Torres, a board member who visited our floor for a routine department tour. She stopped by my desk, noticed the color-coded efficiency charts on my screen, and asked what I was working on. "Just some personal analysis," I replied automatically. She tilted her head. "That doesn't look like personal analysis. That looks like business intelligence we should be reviewing at the board level." Something in her tone gave me courage. "Would you have time for coffee sometime? There's something I think the board should know." 2 days later, in a quiet corner of a cafe 3 blocks from the office, I showed Vivienne my complete analysis. Her expression remained neutral until I finished speaking. "The board has been concerned about our female employee retention rates," she finally said. "Now I understand why we're losing so much talent." She closed my laptop gently. "Keep documenting, keep excelling, and don't tell anyone we've had this conversation." For months, nothing seemed to change. I continued working, continued documenting, continued watching Everett take credit for others' brilliance. Then came the email inviting me to a confidential meeting with the board. I arrived 15 minutes early, heart pounding. The boardroom felt cavernous with just me sitting there, waiting. When the door opened, I expected Vivienne. Instead, the entire board filed in. "Ms. Mercer," began the chairperson, "we've been reviewing your analysis alongside our company performance metrics. We've come to a decision about the future of the marketing department." My stomach tightened. Had I overstepped? Was I about to be terminated for collecting this data? "We'd like to offer you the position of marketing director, effective immediately." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Everett will report to you starting tomorrow. We've already drafted the announcement." "But he has 10 years more experience than I do." The chairperson leaned forward. "Experience isn't just measured in years, Miss Mercer. It's measured in results. Your hidden contributions have kept this department afloat while being attributed to others. Imagine what you could accomplish when you're actually acknowledged as the leader." I hadn't told anyone about the promotion. I wanted to process it myself first, to prepare for the inevitable backlash. I certainly hadn't planned to announce it at the holiday party in front of everyone, but Everett's public humiliation of me forced my hand. Now, standing amid the shocked silence following my revelation, I realized the real challenge was just beginning. Everett's expression had morphed from shock to something darker, more calculated. "We should discuss this privately," he said through clenched teeth, grabbing my elbow. I gently removed his hand. "We can meet in my new office tomorrow morning at 9, I said, loud enough for nearby colleagues to hear. "I'll be reviewing the department structure." As I walked away, conversations erupted behind me. I could feel Everett's eyes burning into my back, but I didn't turn around. Instead, I found Lucia and Tessa huddled near the dessert table, watching me with wide eyes. "Is it true?" Lucia whispered. I nodded. "He'll make your life hell," Tessa warned. "Probably," I agreed, "but he'll have to do it as my subordinate." For the first time in years, I slept deeply that night, waking refreshed despite the challenges I knew awaited me. I arrived at the office an hour early to find my belongings already moved to the director's office, a glass-walled space 3 times larger than my former cubicle. On the desk sat a single yellow sticky note: "Enjoy it while it lasts." I was reviewing department files when Everett appeared in my doorway precisely at 9, wearing a smile that suggested our confrontation had never happened. "Andy, congratulations on the promotion. I think there's been some confusion about reporting structure, but I'm sure we can sort that out." I gestured to the chair across from me. "No confusion, Everett. The board was quite clear." His smile tightened. "Look, I've been running this department for 7 years. The clients know me. The team respects me. This arrangement won't work." "It already is working," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. "These are the new department guidelines. The board approved them yesterday." He flipped through the pages, his face darkening. "A complete restructuring? Team rotation? Mandatory documentation? Of idea origination?" He threw the folder down. "This is micromanagement. This is transparency." I finished for him. "Every idea will be attributed to its creator. Every team member will receive credit for their contributions." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You think you've won something here? I built relationships with every client we have. One word from me, and they'll walk." I'd anticipated this. The board has already informed our top 10 clients about the leadership change. They've expressed enthusiasm about the new direction. "This is about yesterday, isn't it?" His voice rose again. "You couldn't take a little constructive criticism, so you went crying to the board with some sob story. This is about 3 years of systematic appropriation of others' work. This is about creating an environment where innovation is rewarded regardless of who generates it." Everett stood abruptly. "You've made an enemy today, Andy, and I'm not someone you want as an enemy." As he stormed out, I noticed Lucia standing just outside the glass wall, having witnessed the entire exchange. She gave me a small, hopeful smile. That smile was worth whatever battle was coming. The following weeks brought exactly the challenges I'd expected. Everett accidentally excluded me from critical client communications. Meeting invitations mysteriously disappeared from my calendar. Documents I needed for presentations went missing until just minutes before I was scheduled to speak. But I'd prepared for this. I'd created redundant communication channels, set up automatic backups, and most importantly, I'd started meeting individually with team members, particularly those who'd been silenced before. "Your content strategy for the Harrington account is brilliant," I told Tessa during one such meeting. "I'd like you to present it directly to the client next week." Her eyes widened. "Me? But Everett always handles the Harrington presentations." "Not anymore," I said. "It's your idea. You should present it." One by one, I gave team members ownership of their ideas. The results were immediate and stunning. People who had been going through the motions suddenly came alive with creativity. Projects improved dramatically when their true architects were allowed to guide them. Everett's desperate attempts to undermine me grew more obvious as his influence waned. Whispers about how I'd slept my way to the top began circulating, whispers that mysteriously originated near Everett's new workspace. I never confronted these rumors directly. Instead, I let my work speak for itself. I implemented a weekly innovation showcase where team members presented their current projects and received public recognition. Notably absent from these showcases was any original contribution from Everett. When his turn came to present, he'd offer vague strategy platitudes or recycle concepts from industry publications, sometimes word for word. The defining moment came 3 months after my promotion. Our biggest client, Harrington Industries, was considering expanding their contract to include our international division, a deal worth millions. I assigned the proposal development to a diverse team that included Lucia, Tessa, and 3 other previously overlooked employees. The night before the presentation, I left their completed presentation materials in a labeled folder on my desk, planning to review them one final time in the morning. When I arrived at 7 a.m., the folder was gone. The building security logs showed only one other person had entered our floor since the cleaning crew left at midnight, Everett, who had badged in at 5:43 a.m. and out again at 6:12 a.m. At 8:30, I received an email from him. Andy, I took the initiative to handle the Harrington presentation myself today. As the person with the longest client relationship, it makes sense for me to lead this. I'll let you know how it goes. And I checked the conference room booking system. He'd moved the meeting to an off-site location, a restaurant 15 minutes away. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. I had minutes to act. I grabbed my phone and called Vivienne Torres. Andy, is everything all right? Her voice was calm, professional. Everett stole the Harrington presentation and moved the meeting off-site. I need help. Her response was immediate. Text me the address. I'll handle it. I had no idea what "I'll handle it" meant, but I trusted her. I sent the restaurant address, then gathered every backup copy of the presentation materials I could find. This was exactly why I'd implemented our new triple backup system. When I arrived at the restaurant, breathless and clutching my materials, I froze at the entrance. Through the window, I could see Everett already seated with the Harrington team, 5 executives in business attire listening intently as he gestured emphatically. Before I could push through the door, a sleek black car pulled up, and Vivienne stepped out, followed by 2 other board members and, most surprisingly, Eleanor Harrington herself, the founder and CEO of Harrington Industries. Perfect timing, Vivienne said, straightening her blazer. Eleanor and I were having breakfast when your text came through. She was quite interested to hear about our new transparency initiative. Eleanor Harrington, a commanding woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that miss nothing, nodded briefly. Vivienne tells me you've been revolutionizing how credit is assigned for creative work. As someone who spent decades watching men take credit for my innovations, I'm intrigued. Together, we walked into the restaurant. The look on Everett's face when he saw our group was a masterpiece of dawning horror. Everett, Eleanor said warmly, I didn't realize you'd be presenting today. The schedule my office received listed Andy Mercer and her team. Everett recovered quickly, flashing his practiced charm. Last-minute change, Eleanor. Given my history with Harrington, I thought it best I handle this personally. How thoughtful, Eleanor replied, her smile never reaching her eyes. But since Andy is here with the board members, why don't we let her proceed as planned? Actually, I interjected. The presentation was developed by a team that isn't here. Lucia, Tessa, and 3 other colleagues created this proposal. I'm just delivering their work. Eleanor's eyebrows rose with interest. Giving credit to the actual creators? How novel. She shot a pointed look at Everett. I'd very much like to hear what your team has developed, Andy. As I set up the presentation, Everett leaned close to whisper, This changes nothing. You're still out of your depth. I proceeded to present the team's international marketing strategy, carefully attributing each section to its creator. When I finished, Eleanor and her executives were nodding appreciatively. This is precisely the innovative thinking we've been looking for, Eleanor said. Particularly the Asia-Pacific approach Lucia developed. Is there any reason we can't meet these team members directly? They're available now, I said, pulling out my phone. I can have them join us via video call in 5 minutes. Eleanor smiled. Perfect. What followed was a 45-minute discussion where my team members, appearing on my tablet screen propped at the center of the table, directly answered questions about their components of the strategy. Their expertise shone through, their passion undeniable. Everett sat silent, growing increasingly rigid, as it became clear he couldn't answer the technical questions the Harrington team posed. He didn't understand the strategy well enough to claim it as his own. When the meeting concluded, Eleanor walked me to the door. Vivienne mentioned your analysis of performance metrics correlated with idea attribution. I'd like to see that data sometime. I'd be happy to share it, I replied. Good. And Andy? She lowered her voice. I recognize what you're doing here. 20 years ago, I wish someone had done the same for me. She handed me her business card with a personal number written on the back. Call me directly if you need anything. In the weeks that followed, Everett's position became increasingly precarious. The Harrington contract was finalized, our largest deal ever, with explicit language requiring the original strategy creators to remain involved throughout implementation. Other clients began requesting similar transparency. Our new attribution system wasn't just an internal policy anymore. It was becoming our market differentiator. Everett's attempts to undermine me grew desperate. He began copying me on emails at 3 a.m., then scheduling 7 a.m. meetings to discuss them. He questioned every decision in public forums, trying to make me appear indecisive. He planted seeds of doubt with longtime clients, suggesting the company was becoming too focused on feelings instead of results. None of it worked. The department's performance metrics were undeniable. Projects moved faster. Client satisfaction scores rose. Employee retention improved dramatically. Meanwhile, Everett's individual contributions remained non-existent. Under our new system, he couldn't generate any measurable value. In 3 months, he hadn't originated a single implemented idea. I knew he was searching for other jobs. Our IT monitoring system flagged his resume uploads from company devices, but his lack of demonstrable personal achievements made finding comparable positions difficult. I could have fired him. The board would have supported that decision. But termination would have allowed him to play the victim, to create a narrative where I was the villain who'd pushed out a longtime leader over a personal grudge. No, I needed something more definitive, more transparent. The opportunity came during our quarterly department review. We had introduced a new evaluation system where team members assessed each other's contributions anonymously. The aggregated scores created a clear picture of who was driving value and who wasn't. Everett's scores were abysmal. Not because people disliked him, our system specifically separated personal popularity from professional contribution, but because he genuinely added nothing of substance to any project. After reviewing the results with the board, we implemented a department restructuring. Everyone received new role definitions aligned with their demonstrated strengths. Every person except Everett, who was placed in a newly created position, documentation compliance specialist. His job? Ensuring all work was properly attributed to its original creators. Monitoring for instances where credit was misappropriated. Maintaining the integrity of our creative ownership system. The very system designed to prevent what he had done for years. The irony was exquisite. To succeed in this role, he would have to actively identify and prevent the behavior that had built his entire career. And every success in his new position would further validate the system that had exposed his inadequacy. I called him into my office to discuss the transition. "This is constructive dismissal," he said immediately. "You're trying to force me to quit." "Not at all," I replied. "This is a critical role in our new structure. The board specifically requested someone with your attention to detail. You're demoting me to a glorified clerk. I'm reassigning you to a position aligned with your demonstrated capabilities." I smiled. "You'll maintain your salary and title as associate director. Your office remains the same." "This is about revenge, isn't it? For all those times I pushed you to be better?" I leaned forward. "This is about transparency, Everett. Something you've never valued." "I could sue for harassment." "You could," I agreed. "But discovery works both ways. All those emails would become public record. All those meeting recordings. All those documented instances where you took credit for others' work. Is that the legacy you want?" He had no answer. The following morning, his office was empty. Not cleared out, just unoccupied. I assumed he'd taken a personal day to consider his options. But he appeared just before lunch, carrying a box of personal items, his expression unreadable. "Moving offices?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Moving on," he replied. "I've accepted a position with another company." I felt a momentary pang of disappointment. Had he escaped the consequences so easily? That was quick. "Which company?" A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "It's more of a lateral move, a chance to build something new." 2 weeks later, I discovered where he'd landed. A former colleague sent me a social media screenshot. Everett beaming alongside a small group in a cramped office space, announcing his new role as marketing strategist, at a startup I'd never heard of. The company had 3 employees, including him. I felt no satisfaction seeing his reduced circumstances. That wasn't the point of what I'd done. The real victory came 3 months later, during our semi-annual employee engagement survey. Participation, 100%. Satisfaction, up 42%. Trust in leadership, up 57%. Would recommend as a workplace, up 61%. And most tellingly, in the comments section, one anonymous response stood out. For the first time in my career, I feel safe bringing my ideas forward. I no longer fear my contributions will be stolen. I no longer have to choose between advancing my career and maintaining my integrity. That was the real revenge, not destroying Everett, but creating an environment where people like him couldn't thrive, where the behaviors he represented became relics of an outdated workplace culture. 6 months after Everett's departure, Eleanor Harrington invited me to speak at a women's leadership conference. My topic? Transparency as Transformation: How Attribution Drives Innovation. As I prepared my presentation, I received an unexpected email from Naomi, Everett's wife, or rather, his ex-wife. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." The message was brief. "Andy, I don't know if you remember me from that holiday party. I'm writing to thank you. What you did at your company inspired me to look more closely at my own marriage." I realized I'd been allowing Everett to take credit for my contributions for years, not just professionally, but personally. The day after he started his new job, I filed for divorce. I've since launched my own interior design firm. For the first time in 15 years, my name stands alone on my work. I thought you should know the ripple effects of your courage, Naomi. I sat back, reading her words again. My actions hadn't just changed our workplace. They'd created waves I never anticipated. The night of the leadership conference, I stood before a room of 500 women and a few men to share what we'd built. Not just a new department structure, but a new paradigm where transparency served as both shield and spotlight, protecting the vulnerable while illuminating the truly innovative. The most powerful thing about transparency, I concluded, is that it doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't demand that you fight back against those who would diminish you. It simply illuminates the truth, allowing everyone to see clearly who contributes what. In that light, those who add value shine naturally, and those who don't. I paused, thinking of Everett in his cramped startup office. Those who don't must either change or fade away. The applause was thunderous. As people lined up afterward to speak with me, I noticed a familiar face waiting patiently at the edge of the crowd. Vivienne Torres. When the last attendee had gone, she approached, smiling. Impressive speech. Thank you for giving me the chance to have something worth speaking about. She shook her head. I gave you nothing but an opportunity. You built everything that followed. She handed me an envelope. The board asked me to deliver this personally. Inside was a letter confirming my promotion to Senior Vice President of Creative Strategy, a new position overseeing innovation across all departments. We're implementing your transparency framework company-wide, Vivienne explained. Every department, every team. The board believes you're the right person to lead that transformation. I thought of that holiday party, just 1 year earlier, how I'd stood frozen as Everett publicly humiliated me. How close I'd come to walking away, to becoming another talented woman who left rather than fought. How differently everything might have unfolded if I'd stayed silent. I'd be honored, I said. Later that night, as I sat in my hotel room reviewing the conference materials, my phone pinged with a notification. A business news alert. The startup Everett had joined had ceased operations after failing to secure second-round funding. I felt no joy at his failure, no vindictive pleasure. My revenge had never been about destroying him. It had been about creating a system where people like him couldn't survive unless they changed fundamentally. Some would call that mercy. I call it justice. 1 year after that humiliating holiday party, our company hosted another celebration. This time, I stood at the center, raising a glass to toast the highest performing year in company history. To transparency, I said, as 50 colleagues, many of them women who had nearly left before our transformation, raised their glasses in response. To transparency, they echoed. Somewhere across the city, Everett was likely updating his resume, preparing to charm his way into another position where he could take credit for others' work. But he would find fewer and fewer such opportunities. Our transparency framework had spread to other companies in our industry. Former team members had taken it with them to new positions. The ripples were becoming waves. In the end, my revenge wasn't firing Everett. It wasn't humiliating him publicly or destroying his career. My revenge was changing the game entirely, creating a world where the Everetts couldn't win anymore. And that was sweeter than any momentary triumph could ever be. If this story resonated with you, you've probably experienced someone taking credit for your work or ideas. Maybe you're still finding your voice, still gathering courage to stand up for yourself. Remember that transformation doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it just requires illuminating the truth in ways that can't be ignored. If you found value in Andy's journey, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of quiet revolution and justified revenge. And share your own experiences in the comments, because when we speak our truths collectively, we create spaces where the Everetts of the world can no longer thrive.